A woman with a towel on her head lies on the bed. A girl with pink hair sits on top of her sick mother, holding her hand. The girl doesn't understand at all how this happened to her mother. Her eyes fill with tears, but she has to hold them back. Her life became like broken glass, because the girl's father died, and now her mother was seriously ill. Not everything was going well. Having decided that she will definitely save her mother, the girl is about to leave. She asks the sick woman to wait a moment and disappears behind the door. A servant entered the office of the Duke of House Charlotte with the news that the master should see someone. As someone approached behind the servant, Benjamin Charlotte didn't understand who he should look at if an advertisement for a maid had been posted. But he hadn't been informed about it. The servant tried to explain, but a girl stepped forward and interrupting him. She said she wasn't here to become a maid. The child approached Benjamin and placed a small object on his desk. The Duke certainly did not expect to see exactly this and seemed to recognize the thing on the table. The item was a pendant with a chain, a memento of the girl's father, Liam Charlotte, Benjamin's brother. The girl, answering the Duke's question, says her mother's name is Renata, and that she used to work as a maid on the Charlotte estate. After listening to the young visitor, Benjamin remarked that, as they say, it was love until the grave. After thinking for a bit, the Duke asks the butler to leave him alone. And the servant bows and leaves through the door. Benjamin wants to know how the girl's mother is doing after Liam's death. The guest does not hesitate to say that she, like most women who raise their children alone, lives in poverty and unhappiness. Having answered the Duke, the girl thinks that normal people would react with sympathy, but the people on this estate will probably only feel joy because they hated her mother. Since she was a maid, upon learning of the poverty, the man begins to think, while the girl, looking at him, understands that this is the only place she can turn to for help. Without waiting for an answer, the girl asks to save her mother, although she knows the Charlotte family doesn't care. The Duke doesn't believe it. The girl is actually counting on help, because due to the elopement with her mother, the family lost an heir, and the Duke himself lost his brother. The girl emphasizes that she is Liam's only child, and if they provide help to her mother, she promises to move into this mansion, be lower than water, quieter than grass, and stop keeping in touch with those she knew before. Benjamin asks if she understands what that condition means, because all this also applies to Renata, which means they will never see each other again. But the little heroine is ready to take that step. A little disconcerted by the girl's determination, the Duke finally asks for the name and the age of the guest. She introduces herself as Sabina, 8 years old. Upon leaving the room, Benjamin declares that from now on her name will be Sabina Roll de Charlotte, and in exchange for saving her mother, the girl must never forget the weight of her name in the future, as her father did. The old man learns that Liam's daughter has arrived, but this news does not please him at all. Rather, it irritates him. The butler apologizes for not being able to bring the girl and justifies this action by worrying about the master's health. The man replies that it doesn't matter, because he himself has no desire to meet the daughter of a traitor to his parents. Memories of that very betrayal crossed the old man's mind. Liam shouted that his father couldn't always be right, even if he really wanted to be. But soon everyone would be convinced that this was completely wrong. The father said over his shoulder that his son was a fool because he had lost his head over a low-born woman, and that he had disgraced his surname and that he would regret it. The father tells Liam that even if he tries hard, everything will still be incredibly difficult, and in the end, his son will bow his head and beg for forgiveness, sooner or later. Having relived painful memories, the man stood by the window with an indifferent look. 13 long years have passed since then. 3 years have passed since the girl appeared in the palace. One of the maids ran to the girls, cleaning the living room. They didn't understand why Melissa was here. Melissa says that the atmosphere in the dining room is very oppressive, and Mr. Simon is so strict that it can be felt even during meals. One of the maids asks Melissa not to pretend she doesn't know why Simon is behaving this way, and why he can't stand the girl because she is a bastard. Melissa is surprised by what she hears. The Charlotte family is a great family of water-type mages. Their power is passed down from generation to generation. Every family member is born with a great predisposition to the water element. Benjamin and the girl's father, Liam, were very talented. Everyone assumed that Sabina had also inherited this gift, but her abilities should have manifested before the age of 10. Gossip says that the abilities did not manifest due to the mixing of dirty blood. Sabina was sitting at the dining table. She ate slowly with a thoughtful look. She was brought out of her thoughts when she was called by name. At the table beside Sabina were Mr. Simon, sitting opposite the girl, and Duke Benjamin, located next to the table. Simon expressed his displeasure with Sabina's appearance. He didn't understand why she was wearing the same outfit, even though he allocated enough money for clothes. Does she really want the princess of House Charlotte to be ridiculed? The girl, with her head bowed, promises to be more attentive, but she believes that Simon himself said he dislikes all the outfits she wears. Although the discontent is understandable, who would be kind to the half-breed daughter of a dead son? The Duke interrupts the conversation about clothes with the message that the prince will arrive at the estate soon, and that a room has been assigned to him on the second floor of the main building. Simon recalls that such a guest must be received properly. The gentleman informs Sabina that they are forced to move her bedroom to the annex, and furthermore, she is forbidden to appear in the main building when the prince arrives. If they meet by chance, the girl must present herself as an estate worker. The young woman is shocked by this statement. It turns out that the half-breed is not allowed to see the noble prince or even introduce herself as a Charlotte. But she loudly agrees and promises to do everything. Sabina makes sure everything is fine, because this is not the first time she has been treated this way, and she also has to endure it for the sake of her mother. But it seems they despise her greatly. The girl is distracted from continuing her meal when she hears a name in a conversation between men. One of them suggested ending the conversation about the fifth prince, Richard. Sabina cannot believe what she heard. She feels uncomfortable, citing health problems. She asks permission to leave the dining room. Not suspecting anything about the true reasons for the girl's behavior, Simon gives her permission to leave the table. Getting up from the table with a rather calm look, Sabina thanks the gentleman for his understanding. But inside her, a very strange feeling even twisted her stomach. As she left the dining room, the girl was able to fully understand what was bothering her so much. Richard was the name of her friend's novel. That was the name of the psychopath prince. At first, the heroine thought she had simply been reborn, but that was only at the beginning. Here she is, with a crown in her hands, running across a flowery field towards her parents. Everything around her is good and calm. Life seems absolutely wonderful. Later, while walking down the street with her mother, the heroine overhears a conversation between two women. They were discussing the fifth prince, the fact that he is very different from common children. They say the prince doesn't even raise an eyebrow while hunting, killing animals, and that he likes looking at blood, but looking into his eyes makes you feel different. Hearing this description of the prince, the girl thought he strongly resembled a novel character. The heroine doesn't believe she could be reborn in the novel, but the status of an illegitimate child in a noble family, fifth Prince Richard with a not-so-good reputation, proved otherwise. This was the plot of the novel. Richard Gale de Cesario, the protagonist of the novel The Chronicles of Cesario, lived a difficult childhood, being rejected by a prince, and upon reaching adulthood, he was exiled to fight demons. According to the plot, he later meets a saint, and thanks to her finds his salvation. In the end, Richard, having defeated the great demon, ascends the throne and receives the blessing of everyone. He marries a saint and has a happy ending. The writer and a friend discussed the novel's plot. The friend considered the prince too banal and was interested to know why Sabina was more important than the protagonist's beloved. The writer explained that according to the plot, after Sabina's death, the main character will suffer psychological trauma. A friend suggests a situation where the prince himself kills Sabina, and it turns out the main character is a psychopath who knows no emotions. Both girls are absolutely delighted, but for Sabina, this is not the best turn of events. Now, looking from the outside, she wants the writer to be proud of her story and not change the novel for a couple of tips. She can also feel sorry for the main character and not make him cruel. Sabina, reaching out her hand and shouting at him to stop, woke up in bed. She realized, though not immediately, that she had had that dream again. And she also remembered the name Richard Gale de Cesario. A friend rewrote the novel following the heroine's advice, and the book became as dark as its character, without compassion or humanity. And the heroine was reborn in it, doomed to be murdered by the main character. She was happy for her friend when the novel became popular. But now, sitting up in bed, the girl wanted to know why she was reborn in this particular book. The heroine is not the novel's Sabina, so she is not strong in magic. But in any case, the prince is already heading to the Charlotte estate. Perhaps there is a way to influence the plot. It remains to decide what to do correctly. In such a situation, the girl was drawn from her thoughts about changing the plot when the door opened, and a loud shout of her name. A teacher, Madame Clarissa, appeared in the room. She was very displeased that Sabina was still in bed and not in her class. The girl cannot believe that it is class time, because it is only 7 in the morning. If the afternoon class was moved to the morning, then she doesn't know about it. And it is too early even for morning classes. But it makes no sense to argue. Resigned to the inevitability of the class, Sabina sits down at the table while the teacher watches her intently. She arrived to teach the girl at the request of Simon, her grandfather. As Sabina sits down, Madame Clarissa introduces herself and announces that she is the one who will teach the girl everything Mr. Simon wants to see in her. As the maid sets the table, Clarissa says that today the study of tea etiquette continues. Well, Simon was obsessed with the girl's education. Therefore, even the teacher's words were law for her. Looking at the tea set, Sabina thought that if she needed to make her angry, then calling Madame Clarissa was enough. In 3 years, Madame made sure that the girl made up for lost time. But it wasn't her outstanding teaching skills. Unaware of Sabina's thoughts, Madame Clarissa gives a lesson. She orders the student to watch the tea, but is clearly waiting for something. The girl tries to do what is required, realizing that Madame is simply waiting for a mistake from the student. Observing Sabina's actions, Madame Clarissa clearly shows her displeasure. It seems she dislikes every action of the student. The girl looks expectantly at the teacher. She is not sure if she did everything right and awaits a hint or approval. Madame is sad again. She yells at Sabina, demanding that more tea be poured into the cup. When the girl fills the cup sufficiently, in the teacher's opinion, Madame Clarissa demands that she lift it. Looking at her reflection in the tea, Sabina cannot believe that she was forced to fill such a large cup completely. Madame tries hard to make the girl make a mistake by lifting the cup. The student understands that it is very difficult, and she is about to spill the drink. A sudden tap of the pointer causes the cup of hot drink to fall from Sabina's hands, and Clarissa declares that the finger was too high. The maid runs to the girl, wishing to help somehow. Sabina continues to sit silently in the chair, with the unfortunate cup in her hands. She made no sound, although she spilled most of the boiling tea on herself. Madame Clarissa laughs maliciously into her hand, and then declares that Sabina should have done what she indeed taught. Unable to bear the unfounded criticism, Sabina abruptly set the cup down on the saucer, spilling the remnants of the innocent tea. This act by the girl completely infuriated Madame Clarissa, who looked at the disobedient student with evident irritation. Sabina answered the executioner with the same look, full of hatred and irritation. While the maid tried to at least tidy up the young woman, the teacher decided to mockingly ask what kind of look Miss Sabina had. The girl, not wanting to endure the harassment any longer, stated that this phrasing of the question was clearly not something she should say to Madame Clarissa. First asking if the student was trying to blame someone else. Clarissa said that this incident could have been avoided if Miss Sabina had not been a half-breed. The young woman understood that Madame Clarissa would not apologize. Sabina was tired of such a disdainful attitude. Madame always made fun of the girl, but Sabina did not expect her to cross the line. The girl recalled that Clarissa always made fun of her. While teaching her the correct posture, she threatened to leave Sabina without lunch if she dropped the book again. The teacher extended lessons at her whim. She could force the girl to sit at the table all day. And now Madame Clarissa was standing by the young woman with a victorious look. She did not expect any resistance from her student. Sabina stood up abruptly, causing bewilderment in Madame Clarissa. The girl could no longer tolerate this attitude towards herself. She was incredibly tired of it. Getting up from the chair, she took the cup and defiantly extended her hand with the object forward. Sabina was more determined than ever. The innocent cup rang on the floor and shattered, just when the young woman's patience and humility towards the master hired by Simon had finally broken. Standing by the broken dishes, the girl announces to Clarissa that she has been fired, and that she can be free. The teacher cannot believe what is happening. She again tries to yell at the girl. The maid gets scared, but tries not to show it, and Sabina remains full of determination. The young woman boldly states that an employee who causes harm to her employer should be fired. Clarissa tries to justify herself, saying that what happened was an accident and that she was simply trying to properly train Miss Sabina, and that she always had good intentions. Sabina does not intend to listen to pathetic excuses and demands that from now on she be called Princess. Because now that the teacher has been fired, she is no longer the girl's teacher. Such an announcement from the hated girl completely enrages Clarissa. She even starts trembling with anger. Sabina states that she does not believe Madame is competent enough to teach anyone, although she sees Clarissa's irritation. Having finished speaking, the girl asks the maid to escort the ex-teacher to the exit. Melissa, obeying the lady's order, offers escort to the lady. Angry and shouting at the maid not to dare, Clarissa casts a magic blow at Melissa, which scares her greatly. Observing Madame's action, Sabina is horrified, because using such magic on an ordinary person is complete madness. But Clarissa is very satisfied with herself. Having recovered a little, Madame declares that no princess will come out of Sabina, because she is a copy of her mother, and nothing subtle is observed in her ignorant behavior. And Clarissa's efforts apparently did not help. Sabina, looking at Madame from under her eyebrows, thought that this woman was at her best again, dragging in every opportunity the girl's mother and family tree. The young woman had an idea, sketched a sweet smile, and asked if it was true that Madame liked Sabina's father. Madame Clarissa was originally Liam's fiancée, but Sabina's father ran away with his lover. Therefore, the wedding did not take place. Clarissa kept gossiping about the girl's mother, and most likely the harassment by Madame was precisely because Sabina was her daughter. Upon hearing such a question, Clarissa almost choked with anger. She didn't know what to answer the insolent girl. At that moment, Sabine continued to reason out loud, because this was supposed to be a marriage of convenience between mage families, which means Madame could have married Benjamin and not Liam. From such reflections, the girl concluded that if Madame only wanted the title, she would have acted as mentioned above, but since this did not happen, then Clarissa really liked Liam. Madame Clarissa demanded that she shut her mouth, and began to threaten consequences if all this reached Mr. Simon, because it was he who personally hired Madame, and unlike Sabina's mother, who was kicked out, Madame is here. Finishing her speech, Clarissa looked at Sabina with a victorious smile, confident in her unconditional victory. However, the girl noticed that Madame overlooked one detail. Simon will fire Clarissa, because Sabina has the blood of the Charlotte family. The verbal skirmish was interrupted by Duke Benjamin, who suddenly visited Sabina's room, and became interested in what was happening there. Frightened, Clarissa tried to say that the Duke had not understood what was happening. Benjamin, realizing that something was wrong, demands that Madame Clarissa leave the room immediately, and his gaze portends nothing good. Imagining what might await her, Clarissa was completely horrified, but she had to obey, otherwise it could have been worse. Having given the order to Madame, Benjamin turned to Sabina and asked, while speaking to Clarissa, to sit in the room until the girl is called. Having accepted the Duke's condition, the young woman cannot believe what she sees, because from the man's appearance, the girl thought he was angry. When Clarissa leaves the room after the Duke, she turns to give Sabina a scathing look full of hatred. Left alone, Sabina feels a sense of confusion, because no one has ever protected her on this estate. Melissa appears at the door. She is worried and wants to make sure everything is fine with her mistress. Looking at the maid, the girl thinks that apparently she was the one who brought the Duke. Melissa at that moment tries to explain that she didn't run anywhere, and that the magic attack was very painful. Benjamin summons Sabina to his house, and when she appears, the Duke asks the girl to explain what happened in the morning. Sabina wonders if Clarissa really managed to justify herself. Deciding that, for now, it doesn't matter what Clarissa said, the girl clarifies exactly what she needs to explain about the morning incident. The Duke is interested in why Sabina arbitrarily fired the teacher. According to Madame, the girl did not want to go to class, and that's why she became irritable. The young woman doesn't understand if the Duke really believed the teacher. The man explains that the situation cannot be fully understood after hearing only one side, so everything depends on the girl's response. The Duke set out to listen to the girl, but surprisingly, even stood up from his chair. He was unpleasantly surprised by what he saw. Sabina, deciding not to give long explanations, simply lifted the hem of her dress, showing the burn to the Duke, and explained that this happened during a tea etiquette lesson. A blow from the teacher startled her, and that's why the girl spilled the tea. Sabina also mentioned that the cup she filled to the brim was the same size as the one on the table. Benjamin automatically turned his gaze to the dishes, assessing the volume. The young woman continued her speech. She told the Duke that she had heard that Madame Clarissa was her father's fiancée. From this, the Duke can be sure that there was no malicious intent in Madame's action. After hearing Sabina, Benjamin decided that it was worth changing the teacher, and also asks her to immediately inform him next time if something like this happens. The girl was already preparing to leave. Thanking the Duke for his concern, thoughts ran through her head that hiring a future fiancé to replace the teacher could only be done intentionally, and her uncle would have listened to her if she had done so. She complained about Simon and not Madame. Benjamin stopped Sabina with the message that he would be busy preparing for the prince's arrival, and he would not be able to find time to find a new teacher. Moreover, there would soon be dinner with Lady Annabelle, and Fabian would return to the estate. Upon learning of Fabian's return, Benjamin's son, the young woman was upset, as this boded nothing good for her. Memories resurfaced again. Sabina was kneeling by the broken pieces of the vase that Duke Benjamin had given her. It had fallen off the footstool. Fabian, the eldest son of the Duke of Charlotte, mockingly declares that Sabina should be more careful, because it is a valuable thing, and the girl broke it, and it must be difficult for her to pretend to be a princess. The girl understands that her cousin deliberately made her stumble. Fabian, like all members of the ducal family, was hostile towards Sabina every time he saw her. He falsely accused the girl of something she didn't do, as if she wanted to achieve something greater. Hate Sabina things calmed down when Fabian entered the academy, but when he returned, Sabina did everything possible not to attract her brother's attention. The young woman wondered what would happen when the fifth prince and her cousin were on the estate at the same time. Benjamin plans to stay in the mansion while the prince is staying here, and asks Sabina to behave quietly under the lawn because he needs to greet His Highness properly. Upon learning of the worthy reception, the girl didn't believe it. Is she really not worthy of saying a word? Well, it's not even funny. On the occasion of Lady Annabelle's arrival, it was decided to organize a family dinner. Since this is a family event, the Duke asks Sabina to be present. The girl promises to behave quietly so as not to embarrass the Duke, and bids him farewell with a curtsy. Leaving the Duke's office, Sabina was very angry because Uncle Benjamin didn't even care about her or ask how she felt. Approaching the window, she tried to forget about her uncle's disinterest. There was no time to think about it. Now the main thing was to try not to let the prince get close to her. The two maids were discussing the latest events. They were very worried about Madame Clarisse's dismissal, because even Madame's father came to beg for forgiveness. But the Duke remained adamant. They worried that they too would be fired for remaining silent about Miss Sabina's abuse. The flow of discussions and gossip was interrupted by the appearance of another girl. This was the head maid. The head maid asked what was going on here. The girls explained their fear of being fired if the gentlemen found out about the young lady's abandonment. The elder noted that she should have understood this earlier and been more careful, but for now she should be more polite. Sabina is still a mistress, at least as long as the Duke recognizes her as part of the Charlotte family. While Melissa treats Sabina's leg, the girl thinks how good it is that she won't have to go to Madame Clarisse's classes anymore. There will be no meetings or lessons, although she didn't think it would end like this. Sabina still thinks that this will compensate for all the years of harassment by the teacher. And forgetfully, she says out loud that the burn was worth her dismissal. Hearing such words, the maid got scared. This phrase seemed like a warning to her. Although Melissa did not make fun of Sabina, she watched her very closely, so her fear was quite understandable. The young lady looked intently at the maid. It is surprising, of course, that during the lesson she called the Duke. This really doesn't change anything. Melissa still looks at her mistress fearfully, but she asks the maid not to get nervous. Smiling, Sabina explains that the maid did nothing wrong, and there is nothing to punish her for. Melissa starts crying and begging for forgiveness. The maid says that she was constantly restless and tried to tell Vanessa everything, but she pretended nothing was wrong. Upon learning about Vanessa, Sabina remembers that she is the head maid and cannot believe she behaved that way. Melissa promises never again to ignore something that could harm the young lady. Sabina notes that since this is the case, then from now on the maid is on her side, and she asks Melissa to follow her will, which will be superior to the Duke's instructions. And Mr. Simon, the maid says she has a younger sister, the same age as Sabina, and every time the young lady was bullied, the maid thought this was happening to her younger sister, which is why she will only obey Sabina. Delighted that the maid has agreed, the young woman gives the first order. She wants to know in which of the rooms on the second floor the prince will be staying. In the novel, Sabina was a side character who only appears in flashbacks. The girl knew how she died, but she didn't know why. thinking that it would not be so easy to fulfill Mr. Simon's order to avoid the prince. Because no matter how big the mansion was, 6 months was a long time, Sabine walked to the door of the room assigned to the prince. She looks closely at the room so as not to be noticed. The girl needs to know how far the view extends from the window. Sabina reached the window. She needs to know what the prince will see so she can hide from him. Appreciating the view, the girl concludes that perhaps everything is better than she expected. Because from here, the annex where she was placed is not visible. 2 maids walked down the hallway. One of them heard something and pointed first. Deciding to check their suspicions, the maids look into the room and find no one there. They leave, deciding what they imagined. At that moment, Sabina hides under the table, trying not to even breathe. The young woman decides that she can leave when the steps go down, because if someone finds out that the girl was here, then she will be finished. And while sitting under the table, you can think about whether the annex is not visible from the prince's room, which means the girl will be able to avoid his gaze all the time. Unlike the real Sabina, the heroine knows the future, and therefore we can act more carefully. Even her mother, the Empress, was afraid of the prince. This terrible psychopath, probably the main character of the novel, would have become the same even without killing Sabina. The heroine does not like the idea of involving her as a victim, only if the Empress sends the prince to war, and then she will be able to survive. Finally daring to get out from under the table, the girl looks around. Despite the old furniture, the room looks luxurious. They are clearly taking care of her. Sabina guesses that this room belonged to her father. The girl cannot believe that it has been preserved. Continuing to look around, the young woman discovers a gap in the table that, apparently, should not be there. In the hiding place, Sabina discovers a leather notebook, taking it into her hands. The girl really wants to understand why it was hidden. The girl was distracted from studying the finding by voices outside the door. Someone was hurrying someone. They were saying something about luggage. It was time to leave. Leaving the room, Sabina decides to take the notebook with her to study it quietly later. But for now, she hides it under her clothes so that no one notices. The girl tries not to be seen, not even by the maids. She carefully peers out from behind the door so as not to be discovered. Leaving the second floor, Sabina cannot understand what all this fuss is about, because there's still a long time before Lady Annabelle arrives. Hearing the phrase that they haven't seen each other for a long time, the young woman raises her head and sees a boy standing at the top of the stairs. His voice sounds very familiar to her. It was Fabian, who had returned from the academy, and he said he wasn't particularly happy to meet Sabina. The girl didn't believe there would be such a fuss over Fabian's arrival and didn't expect her cousin to arrive so soon. Sabina tries to get rid of Fabian, telling him that after traveling a long way, her brother is probably tired and advises him to rest, while she tries to leave. Fabian is not happy with this attitude. He tells the girl that she lives here to be treated like a princess of the Charlotte family. Therefore, she must behave appropriately in front of the upcoming duke. Sabina does not answer her brother, but thinks that his words are complete nonsense, because she moved here for her mother, and what good would it do her if he caught her becoming duke? The girl calmly states that she will leave here before Fabian becomes duke, which means there is no need to please him. The boy tries to reason with his sister and control himself. Unable to tolerate Sabina's calmness, the duke's son breaks down. He reproaches the girl for being too ungrateful. They did her a favor by letting her stay in this house, and with such an attitude, they should send her to an orphanage. Sabina decides that the orphanage is a good idea, because if she goes to the countryside, she won't have to deal with the prince or the Charlotte family. And knowing the plot of the novel, she could succeed. She asks Fabian to convey a request to the duke to send her to the shelter, since they are on the same side now. The boy is acting weak. It seems to him that Sabina is mocking him and demands that she stop. As she prepares to leave, Sabina tells Fabian that if he doesn't have the courage to tell the duke, then he should step aside and get out of the way. Shouting that the girl is silly, Fabian grabs Sabina's hand to stop her. But she falls. The duke's son did not want such a situation. When Sabina fell, the hem of her skirt rode up, revealing her burned knee. Fabian was a little confused. He clearly did not expect to see such marks on his sister's body. He wants to know what happened to the girl's knee. Still sitting on the floor, Sabina does not answer. She is worried if the notebook is in place. Fortunately, it did not fall out. The girl pressed it tightly with her clothes. Without waiting for an answer, Fabian shakes his cousin by the shoulders. For some reason, he is very worried about Sabina's knee. The guy demands an explanation. The young woman remains sitting on the floor. She asks her brother to be quiet, talks about what happened during the classes with Madame Clarissa, but wonders why Fabian is angry. If Sabina was hurt, he is really worried. Fabian abruptly stands up. He tries to hide his anxiety behind a jab. The girl is not afraid of having to live here for the rest of her life, because if someone else decides to harm her, then there will be nowhere to escape. Sabina even smiled upon hearing about the escape. For a second, she thought Fabian was capable of caring about her. The girl reacts calmly to her brother's mockery and replies that he would say the same even if she died. The boy cannot believe what he is hearing. With incomprehensible anger, the boy shouts, "Has Sabina really gone crazy saying such things?" The girl gets up from the floor, asking him once again to be quiet. Turning around, Sabina throws out the phrase that yes, she has gone crazy, and her brother should rest in his room. And if Fabian wants to fire her, he should talk to the Duke. The girl is not against the shelter. The Duke's son, watching his sister leave, waits until the end hoping she is joking. It is difficult for him to believe that such words can be true. After leaving Fabian, the young woman reached her chambers, passing by Melissa. She asks the maid to bring her tea. A sudden knock on the door and Fabian's shout from behind frighten Melissa, so much that she even jumps. And Sabina reacted with absolute calm to this brother's joke. Melissa looks at the door again, then at the young lady. The maid cannot understand what happened between the young lady and the master. Sabina does not comment on what is happening. She only asks Melissa to bring tea when Fabian leaves. Sitting at the table, the girl thought, looking at the notebook she had found, whether it was worth reading it now, or if it would be better to postpone it. Fabian keeps knocking on Sabina's door the whole time. He shouts at her that if the girl keeps ignoring him, then she won't get away with it so easily. The boy is interrupted when the Duke of Charlotte appears in the hallway. Fabian says he was going to visit his father upon arrival. Not happy with his son's behavior, Benjamin says that Fabian could be heard throughout the mansion. Ordering his son to stop wasting time and follow him, the Duke turned in the opposite direction. Fabian had no choice but to obey. Melissa was finally able to bring you. The maid is interested in where the young lady found this notebook, but Sabina doesn't want to tell the truth. She replies that she picked up the notebook on the street and tried to find the owner by the notes inside. To Melissa's next question about the notebook's owner, Sabina only smiled mysteriously. Since that morning, there has been a stir in the mansion. The maids ran around with dishes, making noise in the kitchen. The rest of the servants were putting things in order and rearranging things. Sabina was still in bed. She tried to hide under the pillow to sleep a little longer, but the noise prevented her. The heroine doesn't understand why the mansion residents are preparing for dinner so early, because there is nothing special about Lady Annabelle's arrival. Of course, this is not a little. 10 years ago, Fabian's mother died of the plague, and Mr. Simon was dissatisfied. Because the Duke remained a widower for a long time, House Charlotte is preparing to receive Lady Annabelle as its new mistress. The maid put an end to all hopes of sleep. She came with the announcement that it was time for the young lady to get dressed. Sabina sat up in bed. After all, she couldn't sleep well when Madame Clarisse's lessons were cancelled. The girl thought she could sleep more. The girl felt that the bandage on her injured leg had fallen off. After asking the maid if Dr. Eugenia had come while Sabina was sleeping, and upon receiving a negative answer, the young lady refuses to help her dress and says she can put on the dress herself. When the maid leaves, Sabina examines her leg and is surprised to find that not only has the bandage fallen off, but the burn on her leg has completely disappeared. The girl wonders if Dr. Eugenia has not returned yet, and there should be no one in the mansion with such healing abilities. So why did her wound disappear without a trace? Healers can be divided into two categories. The first are mages with magical powers, but since life and death are the destiny of the gods, mages with healing abilities are extremely rare. The second are priests who use divine power. Healing was the prerogative of priests. Many people came to them to be healed, but any help had to be paid for. The fact that the Charlotte family can afford a healing mage as a family doctor only emphasizes their status and wealth, considering that the only people who entered the room were Melissa and Sabina herself. The girl has an incredible guess that needs to be verified. To do this, she takes a letter opener. Sabina runs the knife over her finger and then throws the sharp object away from her. Now she is sure that it is her body's ability to heal wounds, because the cut finger healed instantly, which means the girl's strength has finally manifested. Usually, abilities awaken naturally before the age of 10, But sometimes this does not happen, in which case you must carry a magic stone with you that contains a large amount of magical power. There is also the option of receiving magical power from an experienced mage to forcefully open the way. Sabina recalled Madame Clarisse's taunts during the power infusion. Madame said that the type of girl she was born as cannot be hidden or corrected. Now Sabina was trying to understand why the power appeared now, since she hadn't received magical infusions from anyone for a long time. The girl is distracted from thinking about what happened when someone knocks on the door. The maid informs that the Duke asks the young woman to come down. Finishing dressing, Sabina decides to wait for Dr. Eugenia to return. Since she is a healing mage and may be aware of this situation, perhaps the girl can use this power on others. And if so, then she has a chance to heal her mother. Fabian is waiting for Sabina in the hallway, trying to engage the girl. He says that finally his sister was smart enough to dress properly. The girl ignores her brother's statement and moves on, but Fabian is not going to leave his sister alone. Following her, the boy continues a monologue about how he knows what she is doing, that the girl wants to go to the desert so that there, they will treat her like a princess, because here everyone knows who she really is. Exhaling, Sabina tells Fabian that he is free to think whatever he wants. But her brother continues. He believes his sister should not have illusions, because as soon as she appears there, rumors will spread and she will become an outcast. Benjamin comes out to meet the children. The Duke wonders what the conversation is about. Fabian replies that he is having a normal conversation with his sister, whom he hasn't seen for a long time. Sabina does not support her brother in making excuses. The Duke orders his son to stop talking nonsense and come with him, because Lady Annabelle will arrive soon. Lady Annabelle Rosemary appears. She has the honor of being invited to the Charlotte family estate. Upon receiving the guest, Benjamin kisses her hand and tells her that she has honored them with her presence. Then Simon greets the lady. They haven't seen each other for a long time, and Lady Annabelle asks if everything is fine with the gentleman. Seeing all the greetings, Sabina thinks she heard that Lady Annabelle lost her husband several years ago. But looking at their faces, you can't say it will be a second marriage. In social circles, Lady Annabelle is known for her exceptional beauty. Just like the representatives of the Charlotte family, the lady is happy to meet Fabian. She heard that the boy achieved great success at the academy. It is an honor for the Duke's son that such a beautiful lady has heard of him. Annabelle turns to the girl to see who is there. She briefly greets Sabina. The young woman bows in greeting and is about to introduce herself, as expected in secular society. However, Lady Annabelle ignores Sabina and tells Benjamin to go over there, explaining that she was in a hurry and had no time for lunch, which made her very hungry. Sabina remembers when her parents ran away. They got married in a small church, but the Charlotte family refused to recognize Sabina's mother, a simple maid, as his father's wife. During dinner, the girl continued to reflect that the members of the Charlotte family and outsiders like Madame Clarissa all looked at the girl the same way. She was simply Liam's illegitimate daughter, so Sabina's reaction did not surprise Sabine. Because Mr. Simon initiated the marriage, only he and Lady Annabelle participate in the conversation. Sabine calmly observes the situation at the table. Now all that remains is to study the people present. The Duke does not seem interested in the engagement at all. He is simply eating lunch calmly. Although Benjamin shows no interest, he is forced to marry. The very idea that one cannot remain a widower is very outdated. Suddenly, the Duke addressed Sabina with a question about her classes. He wanted to know if she was still studying on her own, despite the absence of a teacher. The uncle's question took the girl by surprise, but she quickly recovered and replied that she was catching up on reading. Thinking that she shouldn't bring up this topic at the table, Sabina continues talking about the book she is currently studying, because she has nowhere else to go. Upon hearing the girl's answer, Lady Annabelle notices that Sabina is very intelligent, which makes her wonder why they don't hire a teacher for the young woman. Benjamin explains that they had to fire the teacher a few days ago due to some circumstances, and they will look for a new one soon. The lady believes that this is no longer necessary. Looking at Sabina, the guest says that at the girl's age it would be good to go to school and communicate with peers, especially since there were good boarding schools in her time. Upon hearing about the boarding schools, the Duke became tense, while Annabelle continued that Benjamin had no reason to keep looking after this child. After hearing what the adults were saying, Sabina thought that the boarding school was a great option for her, and now there is another person who wants to get rid of her. Having finished thinking, Sabina looked at Fabian, hinting with her gaze that he should say something. The Duke's son continued dining. He didn't understand Sabina's insinuations at all, and no expressive glance helped. Looking at her brother again, the girl couldn't understand if Fabian was pretending, or if he really didn't understand anything. At that moment, Lady Annabelle continued saying that she always knew the Duke was a generous man. But Liam was completely irresponsible, although he claimed not to care about the heir's responsibilities. But at an important moment, he made a terrible choice. Both men of the Charlotte family did not approve of Lady Annabelle's speech, and Mr. Simon and Duke Benjamin did not hide their displeasure. The guest, noticing the irritation on the men's faces, tried to justify herself, explaining that she didn't mean any of that, but she only said it because she felt it strongly. Because there was nothing to blame Liam for. He was too trusting. Sabina tried hard to pretend that what Lady Annabelle was saying didn't affect her in the slightest. The guest was not going to stop. She continued her speech, saying that she couldn't believe that some servant dared to brazenly seduce her master. And who knows if Liam is actually the father of a frivolous woman's child. Not wanting to hear such sayings anymore, the Duke forced a smile and turned to Lady Annabelle with the assumption that she had had enough, and she could go home, and urgently asks her to get up from this table. The guest stubbornly does not want to understand what is happening. She even became confused by such a statement. Benjamin orders the maid to prepare the carriage and collect Lady Annabelle's luggage. Addressing his father, the Duke clarifies that since the marriage will not take place, dinner should end there. The lady does not understand if it is really necessary to be so categorical about such a trifle, and she turns to Mr. Simon with this question. Benjamin asks the lady, who she thinks decided to leave the girl on the estate. He believes that the most important virtue in marriage is mutual respect, and in this regard, they are not particularly suited for each other. Sabina sat silently the whole time. She doesn't understand what's going on, because normally the Duke doesn't even pay attention to such things. Maybe he just doesn't want strangers to belittle his family. Angrily, Lady Annabelle got up from the table and declared that, in the end, Sabina was still the daughter of a simple maid. The girl could barely control herself at that moment. Benjamin did not remain silent at the lady's comment. He continued that the girl was also the daughter of his brother, and the maid who was insulted by the lady. Liam's love of life, and compared to the lady and her love for vulgar gossip. Regina was a woman of a much higher level, regardless of her status. Lady Annabelle was discouraged by such words from the Duke, and very annoyed by what had happened. Addressing Fabian and Sabina, Benjamin announces that dinner is over, and asks them to return to their rooms. A second later, the uncle asked the girl if her leg bothered her. She answered in the negative. Sabina dared not look up. She was worried that everything had been spoiled because of her. The girl is so scared that she cannot look Mr. Simon in the face, and he makes no attempt to calm the situation. Unexpectedly for Sabina, the Duke of Charlotte approached her. She was unclear about his intentions, so the girl just looked at him. The girl still wanted to ask what was wrong, but before she had time, Benjamin picked her up and told her that he would take Sabina to the room. The young woman tried to resist, saying she could go by herself, but the Duke wouldn't let her go, saying that in that case, she should have left earlier, and he left under surprised glances. The girl once again asks her uncle to put her down. She explains that she simply panicked when Lady Annabelle raised her voice. But now everything is completely fine. Sabina is embarrassed. The Duke had never stroked her head before, let alone hugged her. A little bolder, Sabina says that Benjamin cannot do this to Lady Annabelle, since they were going to get married. The man decided to answer the girl. He explains that a couple of spoken words do not mean that she must go to the altar, and he never wanted this. Benjamin's plans were to make Fabian the next Duke, and if the wedding had taken place, then many problems would arise in the future. Sabina is glad that she was not involved in the disagreement, and thanks the Duke for his help when he sits the girl on the bed. Benjamin was always curious why the girl called him Duke. Sabina replied, because he is the Duke. From now on, Benjamin asks Sabina to call him uncle and Simon grandfather, without ifs. Sabina really wants to reply that even if she calls Duke uncle and Simon grandfather, they still won't treat her like a family member, so there's no point in changing the addresses. But the girl doesn't say it out loud. The uncle gives the girl another instruction not to let anyone insult her. She must remember that she is a Charlotte. Sabina says she will keep that in mind. Having finished the conversation and wishing Sabina a good rest, Benjamin Charlotte leaves the girl's room. Lying down to sleep at night, the girl decided to remember how and what happened in the novel. She needed to sort out her thoughts. The Charlotte family played an important role in the empire, so they are often mentioned in the novel. Especially when Richard took power, Duke Benjamin was the first to oppose him. The heroine continues to remember, although the novel did not describe what was happening within the family. Since the Duchess didn't appear anywhere, they never got married. Anyway, Sabina was relieved that if the Duke had married, the girl would also have to deal with her. The last thought that dinner today wasn't as bad as she expected crossed Sabina's mind, and the girl fell asleep. Sabina was packing her things in a suitcase. Melissa offers to carry a larger bag, but the girl refuses, explaining that she won't need many outfits in the annex. Folding another dress, the heroine thought that she wouldn't dare go out while the prince lived on the estate, and maybe she should take the notebook with her. The meeting was interrupted by Fabian, who arrived with accusations. He told Sabina that she had not only ruined her own father's life, but was now interfering with the child's father. Sabina explains that if the Duke and the lady marry, they will eventually have a child who will become the heir to House Charlotte. Fabian replies that even if he has a brother or sister, by the time they learn to walk, Fabian himself will be an adult. The girl tries to convey to her brother that the position of a child whose mother is alive is even higher, that the Duke is young and could keep the title until the child grows up, and Countess Maria would not miss this opportunity. She talks about a conversation with her uncle, in which the Duke told her that the lady would not accept Fabian as the heir, and that's why Benjamin rejected the marriage. Fabian didn't immediately believe the girl. After a moment, he realized that his father had done all this for him. Having produced the desired effect on her brother, Sabina turns to leave and orders the maid to move forward. Fabian is breathless. He complains that the 4th floor is too high and his legs hurt. The sister does not continue the conversation. She only thinks that no one forced the boy to follow them. On the 4th floor, there is an attic. It is expected that the prince will not go up to the top floor of the extension. Upon opening the room, everyone present was shocked by what they saw. Melissa even covered her mouth with her hands in surprise. The room was quite depressing. It wasn't clean and wasn't prepared for living in it. Fabian cannot believe that his father could assign him this room. In his opinion, it is rather a warehouse. Placing his hand on his sister's shoulder, the boy asks her to answer something. Sabina abruptly pushes her brother's hand away. She draws Fabian's attention to the fact that there is a bed in the room. Annoyed, Sabina thought that she was so foolish to believe in the Duke's kindness, because yesterday they would not have given her such a room without the Duke's permission. Angrily, Fabian demands an answer from the maid about what is happening in this room. Scared, Melissa explains that the head maid, Vanessa, told her that this particular room was intended for the young lady. The Duke's son demands that Vanessa be brought immediately. The head maid arrived. With a smug smile, she said she was about to take the young lady to her new room. Sabina doesn't believe Vanessa's words one bit. She didn't even pretend to notice the girl, and there was no talk of taking her anywhere. Melissa complains that she tried to talk to Vanessa, but she passed by as if she hadn't seen the maid. Since Sabine moved into the mansion, not a single situation where the head maid intervened had ended well. Fabian expresses his displeasure with Vanessa. He wants to know what the servants think about what is happening here. The head maid pretends not to understand what the young master is talking about, but Fabian does not stop. He wants to know how a member of House Charlotte could be housed in such a place. Vanessa looks at the girl with a smile and says that she only did what Mr. Simon ordered. Unable to bear the tense situation, Sabina, raising her voice, demands that her brother stop this and announces that she will stay here, in this room. The Duke's son is perplexed. He demands that both maids leave the room. The boy wants to talk to his sister alone. When the servants left, Melissa asked Vanessa if she was sure that Mr. Simon had ordered that this particular room be assigned to the young lady. The head maid replied with another smile that everything was correct. Mr. Simon ordered to find a place away from prying eyes, and this place perfectly fits the description and corresponds to the status of a simple maid's daughter. The boy does not understand if the sister will really stay here. He knows that the girl doesn't like it, but maybe now she won't be stubborn. Sabina wonders why the Duke's son cares about this at all. Why is he pretending she doesn't belong here? It is even funny to her. Her brother is outraged that a person trying to help can be spoken to like that. The girl sarcastically states that maybe Fabian wants her to bow to him out of gratitude. The brother demands not to be sarcastic because his patience has a limit. Sabina cannot resist being caustic, saying that the boy has nowhere to find that same patience. Fabian really doesn't understand why Vanessa treats her this way, and apparently is also unaware of the reason for moving the girl to that room. She is an illegitimate daughter who has no right to appear before the crown prince. With passion burning, Sabina shouts that Fabian, her father, and her grandfather are pretending that the girl simply does not exist. The boy definitely did not expect such revelations from his cousin and was absolutely lost. Sabina knew why Vanessa and the other maids treated her this way, but Fabian was worse than them, and it was understood then to let him return to his academy. At the end of her angry speech, the girl demands that Fabian never mess with her. Sabina discourages her cousin. He seems to be lost for a while. He seems not to know how to behave. Having sorted out his thoughts, Fabian declares in the girl's face that he understood her perfectly. After Fabian has spoken, he leaves the room irritated and leaves the girl alone. Once alone, Sabina dropped to the floor. She looked sadly at the room, and not the most pleasant feelings took hold of the girl. It seemed to her that the room spoke for itself. The shame of House Charlotte, the despicable half-breed, the fruit of the love that led Liam to death. Sabina didn't know what to do, but she understood that this could not continue. The girl lowered her head to her knees. She doesn't want to stay here anymore. At first, she only thought about how to avoid meeting the prince, but now her disgust for House Charlotte overcomes her. Sabina expected that if she angered Fabian, he would get rid of her as soon as the opportunity arose. But for some reason, he is trying to help. The Duke will not send her to a boarding school at her request. His dignity will not allow it. Allow this. There is only one person left who can influence the girl's fate. The girl decides that she needs to turn to Mr. Simon, but the problem is that in 3 years they haven't talked normally, which means they need a reason to meet with Simon. Maybe the answer is in the diary. Sabina came to the kitchen. The head maid asks what brought the young lady here. The girl explains that she wants to cook something and that it won't take her much time. She will also need an assistant. Vanessa says that the girl can use the kitchen, but everyone is very busy at the moment. Looking at the workers, the maid announced that she didn't think anyone would be willing to help. The head maid says goodbye, saying that she has a lot more to do. Sabina calls Vanessa. The girl asks if the maid knows why they kicked out Madame Clarissa. She then clarifies that she allowed too much, so if a dog bites the hand that feeds it, then they will get rid of this dog. The head maid responded to such a comment and said she would remember. Sabina looked at her with a smile, showing no tension. Vanessa was about to leave the kitchen. The rest of the maids followed her, using the excuse that they still had a lot to do. Sabina remained alone in the kitchen, but the girl was not upset. She seemed to be waiting for something. The girl was happy when she had company. Sabina asked if she had found what she needed. It was Melissa. She cheerfully reported that she had brought everything the young lady asked for and showed the bag in her hands. The girl expected that Vanessa would not provide anyone to help her, so she prepared. Melissa did not remain silent while unpacking the bag. She said she didn't know that Mr. Simon suffered from insomnia, and she didn't believe it until she spoke with Simon's maid. But the maid didn't understand why the young lady found out about this. She replied that someone told her. While studying the notebook she found, Sabina was very happy to find a signature there. It was her father's diary, Liam Charlotte. When the girl had free time, she read her father's notes. Liam began keeping them in his teens, and the more Sabina read, the more she remembered what he was like. One of the diary entries stated that after her mother's death, her father's insomnia worsened. He became addicted to alcohol, although he practically never drank before, and it was hard for him to accept that she was gone. When my mother was alive, she used to prepare chamomile tea with honey, but now no one does it anymore. Sabina thought, what a banal story. But the girl didn't expect that a person who at first glance had no weaknesses suffered from insomnia. Well, the girl had a chance. Unexpectedly, Melissa asked why the young lady decided to meet with Mr. Simon. Because she had never done this before. Sabina had to reply that now she couldn't stay away. Otherwise, the ending would be too sad. Melissa sheds tears of emotion because Sabina is trying hard to be a good granddaughter, and Mr. Simon treats her like that. The girl even felt confused by such statements. She certainly didn't expect such a demonstration of emotion from the maid. Inspired, the maid offers to bring walnuts to Mr. Simon. But Sabina stops the impulse, reminding him that the gentleman is already old and the nuts must be prepared. They help with insomnia. Upon opening the door, Simon showed no surprise, only asked why she had come. Sabina swallowed, looked at the man, and fear began to envelop the girl. the heroine tried to recover, because a conversation with Mr. Simon is no worse than death. She needs to recover and act according to the plan. Sabina says she wanted to talk and asks him to spend some time with her over a cup of tea. At first, Simon wanted to object because it was quite late, but the aroma coming from the teapot made him change his mind. The gentleman invited the girl in. Upon entering, Sabina thought the matter was small now. She was more than sure that Simon would send her to a boarding school. The man and the girl sat down at the tea table. Melissa moves the cutlery from the cart to the table. When the maid finishes, the young lady lets her go. The tea etiquette lessons were not in vain. Sabina serves the tea herself and invites Mr. Simon to taste it. The girl looks expectantly at Simon as he tastes the hot drink. Taking a sip of tea, the man evaluates it as sweet, but does so with a slightly distant look. As if remembering something, taking the nut, Simon notices that they have an unusual color. The girl explains that they are walnuts toasted in maple syrup, and since the tea is already sweet, they will be good as a dessert. After tasting the dessert, the gentleman says the taste is quite good. Sabina says she heard that walnuts are good for insomnia. Simon asks how the girl knows about sleep problems. Sabina does not answer the question directly. She says that the gentleman always works hard for the sake of the family, so she wants him to rest at least at night. When asked if the girl prepared everything herself, she, lowering her head, replied that she asked Vanessa for help, but she refused, so she had to do everything herself. The man begins to get angry. He considers it audacity on the part of the maid to disobey her mistress's orders, and also promises to ensure that Vanessa apologizes. This time, Mr. Simon's arrogant character plays into Sabina's hands. Vanessa ignored the girl, as always, but she didn't take one thing into account. As long as Sabina belongs to House Charlotte, Mr. Simon will not turn a blind eye to such neglect of the girl by the servants. Although Melissa prepared all the food, Vanessa and the other servants left, so the truth is so unknown to them that there is no one to refute the girl's words. Returning to the tea, Simon decided to resume the conversation and asked about the real reason for the girl's visit. Sabina says she only wanted to apologize because she caused the trouble with Lady Annabelle. Simon closes his eyes and refutes the girl's words, saying that this incident is not Sabina's fault. Smiling slightly, the girl thought that apparently the Duke had already spoken with Simon, and she was just part of the theatrical touch. Sabina says out loud that she doesn't think Lady Annabelle's proposal about the boarding school is bad. She simply couldn't. Don't say it then during dinner. After looking closely at the girl, Mr. Simon asked why she wanted to go to a boarding school. Sabina did not immediately find anything to answer. She did not expect Simon to ask about this. In her head, the answer was that she hated them and this property, and she was not eager to die at the hands of the prince. But she said out loud to find friends. Simon replies that she is weak and too young to go that far. Sabina emphasizes that Fabian entered the academy at the same age. Mr. Simon has to explain that Fabian is the heir to House Charlotte, and the prince's favorite. No matter where he goes, no one will dare to touch him. But with Sabina, everything is completely different, as her origin makes her easy prey for those around her. The girl looked at Mr. Simon with notes of resentment and dissatisfaction. The man explains that this is why he is so careful that the girl's manners are impeccable, because if in the future she meets someone who wants to humiliate her, then she must be able to defend herself. And until she is ready, it's not even worth thinking about leaving this place, thought Sabina, the man who never kept silent about her origin and belittled her more than anyone else. Now he behaves like a real grandfather. The girl is sure that the servants would be punished if she complained, but it would be for the good of House Charlotte. The heroine decided that was enough, since nothing went well, so there was no point in staying here anymore. Getting up from the table, she said she would probably leave. Simon stops Sabina at the door and asks her to continue serving this type of tea in the future. Addressing her grandfather with a smile, Sabina invites him to the annex, and she will prepare tea at any time. Because the prince will arrive in 2 days, so he won't be able to pay her a visit alone. Leaving Simon, the girl thought, the idea of the boarding school failed. She couldn't leave this mansion. Maybe she should just run away. Vanessa approached Sabina with a bow. She asked for forgiveness and said she was too arrogant. After postponing reading and turning against the lady, Sabina clarified exactly why she was apologizing to the head maid. Vanessa began to list for not providing servants at the young woman's request. For acting arrogantly towards Sabina, the maid said all this without lifting her head. Sabina said, with a bored expression, that Vanessa's misdeeds towards her were not limited only to what the maid said. And the girl herself could not believe that this woman would bow to her. It's incredible what can happen when adults get involved. Vanessa, still bowed, said that even 10 mouths would not be enough for her to apologize to the young woman. Feigning that she was tired of everything, Sabina waved her hand and allowed the head maid to leave if she had everything. But the maid did not leave. Mr. Simon suggested that Vanessa's daughter could become Sabina's friend. The maid asks for permission to bring her daughter to the estate so she can help the young lady. Mr. Simon, during the tea party, focused on what the girl said about friends. Sabina cannot believe that her grandfather decided to become friends with Vanessa's daughter, which means Sabina will have a hostage. Having regained her bored look, the young woman asked the maid how old her daughter was and what her name was. Frightened for some reason, Vanessa replied that Viviana turned 12 this year. Observing the maid's behavior, Sabina noticed that apparently she did not want her daughter to become Mrs. Friend. Vanessa replied negatively. The girl said that the maid's reluctance is quite natural, because she knows very well that Sabina is not a common lady. And ordinary. She sometimes acts in ways completely out of place for a lady. This start of the conversation completely disturbed Vanessa, who looked fearfully at the girl at the table. Meanwhile, Sabina continued saying that, for example, she could beat up a friend, injure somewhere with him, and then return completely alone. At such a statement, Vanessa fell to her knees. She said she had made a terrible mistake. She begged for forgiveness, because Viviana had done nothing wrong. Sabina looked at the maid and said that in that case, something bad must have happened for Vanessa to treat her like this. The head maid slumped in all her limbs. She promised that if Sabina forgave her, then the maid would take care of the girl with all her heart. Looking at the slumped Vanessa, Sabina thought it was disgusting. The woman who looked down on her is now obediently on her knees. Faced with this situation, Sabina asks Vanessa to find out the prince's schedule and inform her. Since the girl was ordered not to appear in his sight, it will be unpleasant if they meet. The young lady remembers that the grandfather warned Vanessa what would happen if she caused trouble. Again, the maid agrees. The young lady says that teenagers are still too young to leave their parents. But the young woman doesn't know if her opinion will change with the arrival of the prince. Sabina is sure that Vanessa understood what she was talking about. After a particular dressing down, Vanessa leaves the room. The head maid passes Melissa, as if by chance, touches the maid with her shoulder. Melissa praises the mistress, calling her incredible. Melissa doesn't understand when the girl learned to talk like that, because the maid herself is afraid to say a word to Vanessa. Sabina rather despises her, but doesn't say it out loud. The maid says that, when she was Sabina's age, she only knew how to hang laundry. The young lady told her that this was also good. A child without problems is happiness for parents. Approaching the window, Sabina thought, if she survives the prince's arrival, she will have a chance to reach adulthood. The heroine doesn't like being small. Being small is a look that cannot inspire fear in anyone, a body that cannot do without anyone's help. Being a child is being vulnerable both physically and mentally. Sabina realized this after a year of living in the mansion. It was the first anniversary of her father's death since Sabina moved into the Charlotte mansion, perhaps out of fear of being left alone. But the girl once again felt like a helpless little child. Sabina approached Mr. Simon's room. The maid explains that she cannot go in because the gentleman ordered not to let anyone in. The girl asks her to let her in. She says she really needs to see Simon. The maid gives in to the child's persuasion and asks her to wait a minute outside the door until she finds out everything. In the room, Simon shouted at the maid. He ordered her not to let anyone in, but instead of driving the girl away, the maid came to annoy him. And how dare this girl ask for a meeting on such a day? The girl came to Simon because she expected to share the morning with him. They could become a family, although not for long. But now that she heard this from behind the half-open door, Sabina felt disappointed. Leaving the room and closing the door, the maid said nothing, just shook her head sadly in a gesture of denial. But the girl already understood everything. She left the door thinking she was stupid. The girl knew from the beginning what kind of people were here. She was unclear what she expected. There is no family in this house. That night, the heroine realized that she would have to accept the fact that she was a child. Unlike the real Sabina, who was really a child, the girl received the prince's schedule. Most of the time, the prince will be at the training ground and learning fencing. If the girl eats in the annex, then they won't run into each other. So, Sabina came across Sunday's prayer point in the schedule. There was nothing surprising in this, As the prince is part of the royal family, he needs to dedicate time to the state religion. Sabina thought for a moment. While the prince is in the temple, she, taking the opportunity, will be able to freely visit the main building. Knocking on the door, Melissa informs that Dr. Eugenia has arrived, and the young lady's voice is heard from the room to let the doctor in. Dr. Eugenia is very happy and enters the room, and says that she heard the young woman suffered burns. The doctor approaches Sabina. She remembers that they told her about the blisters that appeared, and the girl must have felt a lot of pain. While talking to the patient, Eugenia simultaneously removes the bandage from the girl's leg. After removing the bandages, the doctor cannot believe what she sees. She sees that there is no burn and no scars confirming the damage. The doctor accuses Sabina of lying. The girl assures that she deceived no one, only that when she woke up the wound was gone. Eugenia, about to leave, tells Sabina that if this was made up to drive away Madame Clarissa, then the young lady acted wisely and the doctor will play along. But the girl explains that the Duke kicked out Madame because he saw the burn with his own eyes. Such explanations make Dr. Eugenia stop and look at the girl, who insists that she is right. Sabina says she can provide proof, looks for a letter opener. With this action, the girl scares Eugenia. The doctor runs towards Sabina trying to stop her. The doctor runs towards the girl and grabs her hand. She tells her that she needs to receive treatment faster. However, looking closely at Sabina's hand, Dr. Eugenia does not immediately understand what happened, because she doesn't have a single cut on her hand. Sabina decides to ask if the doctor thought the girl's words were lies. So, why did she want to hide everything and play along? After hesitating for a second, Eugenia replied that she wanted to support the girl, probably out of pity or compassion. The doctor recalled how she came to Sabina at the request of Madame Clarissa. Almost every time they worked, the young lady required medical assistance. Dr. Eugenia saw what Sabina had to go through during Madame Clarissa's lessons. Madame justified the girl's bruises by saying that, in her opinion, this girl was very difficult to teach good manners. Since the doctor did not want to give up Sabina, the girl turns to her to ask her not to tell anyone about the abilities that have emerged. The young lady does not ask to keep this secret forever, but as soon as they find out, they will immediately look for a new teacher for her. Eugenia remained thoughtful, while Sabina continued saying that there was no guarantee that the new teacher wouldn't be someone like Madame Clarissa. With her head down, the girl believes it is better to remain silent until she is old enough to protect herself. But these words are lies. If you talk about such a rare ability, then soon everyone will know about it, and it will be a threat to life. Sabina is still interested in using the power to heal others. The doctor, after listening to the young woman, promises to keep the secret until Sabina is ready. And answering the girl's last question, she confirms that the power can be used to heal others. Healing is a selfless power. In the initial stage, it allows you to heal yourself, but in the future, it is possible to heal others. However, you will have to study hard for it. Upon learning about her studies, Sabina became sad, because it turns out that the gift is now useless, and studying alone will take her a long time. For the girl, this meant that she could not heal her mother now. Noticing the girl's distress, Eugenia decides to help. She tells Sabina that she only needs to study, and since the girl currently lives in the annex, no one will notice anything. Sabina looks at the doctor gratefully, while Eugenia tells the girl that she will come twice a week, and that the lesson will last 2 hours. Dr. Eugenia is a very talented healing mage. She even taught at an educational institution, so there is no doubt that she is an excellent teacher. Having evaluated all the factors, Sabina sadly reports that she does not have the opportunity to pay for the lessons the doctor will give her. Leaning slightly towards Sabina, Eugenia explains that no adult in their right mind would demand money from a child. The girl is sure that everything must be paid for and informs the woman. The doctor remains firm. She says that parents, not children, should pay for education, especially since she plans to teach Sabina during working hours, so we can assume they have already paid her. Eugenia asks the girl for permission to borrow a knife. Sabina agrees, although she doesn't understand why. The woman makes the same action with the knife that Sabina did before. The girl is indignant. She doesn't want the doctor to hurt herself. Eugenia shows the girl the hand with the cut and tells her that if the healer does not feel a threat to their life, then their wounds will not heal on their own. Sabina is surprised to receive new information, while the doctor says that the girl's case is completely different. The power inside Sabina is so great that the girl cannot control it, so all minor wounds will heal instantly. The heroine examines her hands in surprise. She cannot believe that her strength can be so great. Eugenia is sure that someday in the future Sabina will definitely surpass her. And when this happens, she expects the girl's help. The heroine doesn't know if it's true that she has a special gift, or if the doctor is just trying to comfort her. In any case, the answer will not be known now. For the first time in a long time, the girl was treated with such kindness, and for some reason she is a little worried. Sabina reminds Eugenia that the arm is still worth treating, even if the wound is minor. The woman listens to the girl, performs some magical actions, and the hand is completely healed. Eugenia apologizes for scaring the girl when she cut herself with a knife, but the young woman did the same. Sabina asks the doctor not to hurt herself, even if Eugenia can heal quickly. But that doesn't mean she doesn't feel pain. The woman agrees with the girl. After all, the healer must heal others. Sabina nods in response. Everything is correct, and this is precisely why she wants to study. During the 3 years the girl lived in the mansion, she never heard that her mother had recovered. With the wealth and reputation of House Charlotte, Sabina's mother should not take long to heal. The heroine thought maybe the Charlotte family originally wasn't going to help her. If so, then the girl can no longer count on their help. Composing herself internally, Sabina decided that she herself would heal her mother. Approaching the Charlotte estate, the man comments that it seems the main building is still far away. And the rumors were true. He asks his travel companion to be careful. A man dressed in rich clothes and a bored look is interested in what his interlocutor wants to say. The man lowered his gaze, but still replied that he asked to avoid a repeat of what happened at the palace. The gentleman smiles. Apparently the speech is about the fact that he tried to kill the empress. Of course, can a son really attack his own mother? The assistant recalls the events of that terrible day. He knocked on the empress's door shouting if she was all right. The door opened. The prince was on the threshold. All his clothes were stained with something brown. Surprised, the assistant fell to the floor. If he had seen the thirst for murder in the prince's eyes, he would have decided that he was sick. But in the prince's eyes, nothing was shown. His gaze was completely devoid of emotion. The prince approached the man on the floor and told him in his ear to stop looking like that, because others might discover that the prince was crazy. His Highness's meeting was organized at the highest level. All the servants in the house bowed. The duke was the first to meet the prince. The men of House Charlotte presented themselves before the prince. The duke introduced himself as Benjamin Charlotte, the head of House Charlotte. While the duke says that the prince honored him with his visit, although it was not long, His Highness meets with a slight smile on his face. The prince is standing next to a woman sitting on the floor. This is his mother, the empress. A very bad situation happened in this room. The woman clutches her throat, finds it difficult to speak, but still, gasping, asks the boy behind her who she is to him, and what he has done to her. The prince does not answer her. He simply stands behind her with cold calm. The empress begins to cry. Amidst tears, she asks if the prince has any feelings, if he has ever smiled sincerely, if he will be sad if a person close to the prince dies. The boy is not moved by the woman's tears and pitiful tone. Richard was not normal. Not a single emotion is visible on his face. Forcing himself to turn to the prince, the woman asked the boy another question that tormented her. If the boy understood why she was crying now. The fact that he was different, Richard understood this better than anyone. For him, the empress's question made no sense, so the prince replied with a short no. In the room, Fabian found out if the prince was happy with everything. His Highness was already eagerly awaiting how they would spend the days in this mansion. The duke's son was glad to hear this. Fabian is glad that he volunteered to show the prince everything there is here. He hopes that since he and the prince are the same age, they can get along quickly. The boy invites His Highness to look at the garden. Richard reminds Fabian that they didn't finish talking earlier about Miss Charlotte. During the meeting, the fifth prince says he heard that the duke has a daughter, and that she, like everyone else, should not greet His Highness. Mr. Simon is forced to explain to the prince that his granddaughter is not feeling well, so she went to the province to receive treatment and unfortunately will not be able to greet the prince. Now Richard was telling Fabian that Miss Charlotte must be very sick, because she is very young and is already forced to travel such a distance to improve her health. Fabian is forced to say that in reality the girl is not that sick, and in response to the prince's reasonable question why she was sent away, he explains that the mother of this child is not from a noble family. Her origin is shameful for the family, so she was not allowed to meet His Highness. Smiling strangely, the fifth prince said that he was not one to judge people by their origin. Fabian is surprised by His Highness's reaction, especially since Sabina was very angry that she was not allowed to show herself. Considering the whole current atmosphere, the Duke's son comes up with what seems like a great idea to him. He invites the prince to see the extension and believes that Sabina will be eternally grateful to him. Sabina was busy reading when the maid arrived and said that Mr. Fabian was asking her to come out. The girl remembered that the prince was coming today and she was forbidden to go out. And since Fabian had come, it means the prince had not arrived yet. The young woman does not want to take risks. She asks the maid to tell him that if this is very important, let Fabian go see her himself. A cousin bursts into the room shouting that he asked Sabina to come down. The girl retorted that she thought they had finished the last conversation, but Fabian was indignant because he didn't consider the last time a conversation, because the girl was just yelling at him. Sabina looks up from her reading and reminds the Duke's son that he himself said he understood the girl during their last conversation. Fabian calms down a bit. He has to justify himself, as he didn't expect his sister to take his words so seriously. Sabina tries to control herself. She accuses Fabian of having no idea what it's like to be completely alone, which is why he can mock his defenseless sister without remorse. The brother gets irritated, leans on the table, shows the girl that they don't have time to argue, and that the sister should come down and talk to him. Sabina again rejects such an offer. She is not going anywhere. Fabian remains firm. He is sure that the girl will be very happy when she finds out why he called her. The boy announces to his sister that he is trying to fulfill her wish. He begins to look around the room for a different approach to the situation. Fabian finds a leather notebook. He barely takes the diary in his hands. Sabina gets up from her seat with a loud cry so that her brother does not touch this thing. The Duke's son begins to annoy the girl and mock her, asking what she will do if she doesn't put the diary back in place. Sabina asks him to return the diary because it is very dear to her. Fabian has an idea. After mocking the girl a little more, he declares that if she wants to return the notebook, then the road will catch up with him. Without a second thought, Sabina runs after her brother. She must return the notebook because this is the only thing her father left. The girl catches up with her cousin in the garden among the blooming roses, but just as she is about to unleash her anger on Fabian, she has to stop because she sees someone. With the fifth prince in the garden, Sabina expects that the biggest obstacle in her life is not the prince at all. There is nowhere to go, and there is no way to escape. Sabina is lost for a while. A thought in her head at this moment is that Fabian is a bastard. In the room, listening to Fabian's explanations about Miss Charlotte, Richard assumed that the Duke's son knew nothing. A prince who was exiled for trying to kill his own mother. No one would hide this girl just to please him. There must be another reason for these actions. Richard looked out the window and assessed the panorama. From there, practically nothing was visible. It seemed as if they were deliberately trying to hide the girl. In this case, Charlotte carried out this whole act only to protect the young lady from the crazy prince. But their efforts were in vain. Richard turns on the ruler's status and reprimands the girl that no one warned her that an important guest would arrive today. Although in that case, she would have known who exactly was visiting the estate. Sabina gets very scared by such an encounter, so much so that she cannot hide it. She couldn't even think that Fabian would set such a trap for her. The girl feels very uncomfortable. The prince watches his victim. He wanted to bring the girl before the Duke and enjoy his reaction. But this situation is also good. His Highness decides to scare the girl a little more and send her back. Suddenly, the girl falls to her knees and turns to His Highness. She begs for forgiveness for her rudeness because she did not expect to see the prince next to the annex, and hopes that the prince will be lenient and forgive her. Richard does not lose face in this situation. He demands that the girl state her name and affiliation. Sabina calls herself Viviana, a friend of Miss Charlotte. The heroine used the name of the maid's daughter, whom Mr. Simon wanted to make friends with Sabina. Now the name Viviana will help her a lot, because the prince should not find out who she is. The prince orders the girl to stand up and raise her head. He asks her doubtfully if she is really friends with Miss Charlotte. Sabina easily confirms this information. His Highness casually informs that he heard the Duke adopted his late brother's daughter several years ago. Sabina, disguised as a maid, replies that if the prince's visit had happened a little earlier, they could have met in person, and the young lady would regret not having seen His Highness. And then she asks for permission to leave. Richard asks why Viviana did not go with her friend. Sabina has to get out of the situation. She replies that her mom is the head maid, and she cannot leave the estate. And since the young lady is in very bad shape, they told her to stay. The prince listens to the girl without emotion. He just looks at her and says nothing, as if he is waiting. Sabina feels uncomfortable. She understands that the prince is testing her. Did it really happen that he saw past her lies? A moment later, the expression on His Highness's face changes to a more favorable one. He announces that since Miss Charlotte is not there, Viviana will accompany him. The girl falls into a stupor again. Such a statement from the prince was not in her plans. Richard continues to say, with a smile, that as long as he is on the Charlotte estate, Viviana will accompany him. Mentally, Sabina considers this absurd. She will always be by the prince's side. Maybe in the novel, this is how Sabina met the prince. In the original, Simon also forced the girl to hide the fact that she was part of the family. If you think about it, the prince couldn't just kill a member of a high-ranking family. This happened because she was hiding her identity. Sabina thought, even if she confesses now, she will still be executed for lying to the royal family. And no one will defend the daughter of a common maid. The prince assures the girl that there is no need to worry, that she will not work for free. His Highness will talk to the Duke and agree on everything. The girl, scared and raising her voice, says there is no need to do this, but she thinks that Simon did everything he could to hide her, and he will definitely get angry if he finds out about the meeting with the prince. In this case, security will be assigned, and then he will find out about Dr. Eugenia's lessons. Sabina leaves as best she can, saying how dare she ask for payment when she has the honor of serving the prince in person. And while the lady is outside, she has nothing to do, so if His Highness needs anything, then Viviana is at his service. Richard, in response to the girl's passionate speech, only says that it is praiseworthy. The prince asks the girl to come here when his training is over and not to worry, because at night he will be free. Sabina can only agree. Having finally said they will meet at the agreed time, His Highness leaves, leaving the girl alone. Fabian, noticing that the prince is alone, catches up with him. The Duke's son really wants to know if His Highness has spoken to the girl. Richard replies that she is certainly fit to serve. Sabina's cousin is very surprised by the prince's words about service. He doesn't understand what happened. The fifth prince repeats that the child who ran after the Duke's son will serve well. And His Highness is also interested in knowing why the companion stopped. Fabian quickly comes up with the idea that he forgot something in the annex and asks for permission to leave. Richard, with a strange smile, allows the Duke's son to go wherever he wants. Fabian awkwardly tries to leave the place. For some reason, he once again asks the prince for permission to leave. His Highness watched everything attentively. Now he thinks that if they were going to deceive the prince, they should have discussed everything among themselves first. And Fabian, the heir to the family, turned out to be less cunning than the illegitimate daughter. Sabina tried to regain her senses. She couldn't comprehend the fact that she and the prince had met, and she was still alive. Throwing the girl off balance, Fabiana appeared behind her. Unceremoniously, he placed his hand on the girl's shoulder. He wanted to know if Sabina had spoken to the prince. After finally taking her father's diary from her cousin, Sabina briefly ordered her to follow him. Having led Fabiana to the back room so that no one could hear them, Sabina angrily asked why her brother had taken her to the prince. The Duke's son struck a pose of praise and began to say that there was no need to thank him. Well, it's not that he didn't want them at all, he would have said more. But he was interrupted. The girl shouted with righteous anger that Fabian was crazy. How could he think of doing such a thing and not notifying anyone? The brother doesn't understand what the problem is, because he just fulfilled his sister's wish. Only now did Sabina realize how this idiot interpreted the words spoken in the room. And in fact, since when did he start caring about the girl? The heroine simply has no words in this situation. She had to explain to Fabian what she told the prince about being the daughter of a maid. The Duke's son began to blame the girl for the fact that, because of her words, the prince did not understand everything. Sabina had to defend herself. She told her brother that she would present herself as a maid in a confrontation with the prince. This was her grandfather's order. Now, whatever the case, it is Fabian who is to blame for this meeting, and he will have to do what his sister says. The girl resorts to blackmail. If the Duke's son rejects her conditions, then he will have to tell Mr. Simon that it was he who forced Sabina to meet the prince. And then he might be punished. Having started stuttering, Fabian tried to justify himself by saying that he just wanted to help. And maybe they wouldn't believe Sabina. Upon leaving the room, the girl deliberately pushes her brother with her shoulder and tells him that he had better do as she says and stop stuttering. After changing clothes, the girl, under the name Viviana, presented herself to His Highness at the appointed time. The prince was not alone. Fabian, obeying Sabina's instructions, also came to the meeting, but was clearly not happy about it. Richard praises his companion, saying he did not expect Fabian to be such a good assistant. The Duke's son, having stopped making faces, turns against the flatterer and tells him that his job is to comfort His Highness. Since Fabian has joined the walk, His Highness suggests organizing a small archery competition. The young woman, disguised as Viviana, happily offers to prepare everything for the shoot and hopes the prince won't kill anyone. His Majesty addresses Viviana with a very strange question. He is interested in who the girl will support, trying to understand why this is such a childish question and if it could be a test of loyalty. Sabina chooses, of course, His Highness. Having received the answer, Richard now asks the girl to explain her choice. In his opinion, there must be a reason why Viviana chose him. The girl has to find a reason. It seems to her that the best option is to say that the prince is taller and more handsome than the Duke's son, and that the prince is also very nice. Richard laughs and advises Fabian to pay more attention to his image. The Duke's son, a little offended, declares that everything is fine with his image. Only the girl is unable to comprehend his beauty. An impromptu archery competition begins. The prince half-jokingly says that since the young woman is supporting him, he cannot fall flat on his face. The targets on the trees show a strange result. There is not a single direct hit on the prince's target, but Fabian is doing quite well. His Highness demonstratively praises the Duke's son, pointing out that he is not bad. Fabian tries to refute the praise. Sabina, seeing the performance, thinks that even a fool can understand that His Highness has given in. After shooting at the target and exchanging jokes, Richard approached the girl. He told her that he didn't know what to do, because Viviana was supporting him and he lost. The girl replied that it was just training. The prince did not stop. He said that he still felt uncomfortable after finishing the training this way, and so he asked the girl to let him give her something, after which he pulled the bowstring. By the look His Highness cast towards Viviana, the girl becomes very uncomfortable. She tenses up her whole body. Richard releases the bowstring, and the launched arrow flies into the sky and hits a passing bird. Sabina keeps her head down and the prince, as if thinking about something, continues to look at the sky. The girl feels relieved, but her first emotion was horror. Even though the prince shot the bird, Sabina was scared for some reason. As if not addressing anyone, His Highness says that the bird should not have fallen far. The girl enthusiastically offers to go after the prey. The prince stops the girl's impulse. He wants Fabian to go look for the bird, because His Highness does not think that a small child should be sent to the forest alone. Sabina tries to offer herself once again to go after the bird, but no one listens to her. Fabian tries to send his sister to fetch the spoils, but the prince stops his attempt with the statement that the Duke's son apparently despises the girl very much. Fabian tries to explain himself, but gives up the idea. Still, having decided not to argue further, Fabian leaves the clearing, lowering his head, and going in search of the shot bird. Sabina is completely confused. She doesn't know how to behave and what to do now, because she couldn't even think that she would be left alone with the prince. The girl tried hard to avoid such a situation. She even thought of following Fabian, but the prince's voice calling Viviana took her out of her thoughts. Richard offers to rest until Fabian returns. He spreads the blanket and invites the girl to sit down too. Sabina, acting like a maid, refuses and says how dare she violate the boundaries. But the prince is very persistent. No longer daring to disobey His Highness's order, the girl drops onto the rug. She is very uncomfortable. She sits as if on pins and needles. Sabina thinks it would be good if Melissa were nearby now, but the young lady asks the maid to prepare some treats for her. While the girl is thinking, the prince looks at her with some slyness. The prince's hand reaches for Sabina's hat, a quick and ready move. The girl is left without headwear. She certainly didn't suspect that the prince was capable of such antics. This gesture annoyed Sabina. The prince justifies his action, saying that the sun blinds and he only wanted to borrow a hat. Without waiting for Viviana's answer, Richard puts the hat on his face. The girl begins to feel completely uncomfortable and doesn't know where to go from the awkwardness. Sabina begins to feel sad. She didn't want to show her hair to His Highness once again. Members of House Charlotte have a special characteristic. These are shiny hair and blue eyes. The prince has already seen her face, so there is no need to hide it. But once the prince focuses on these signs, he will understand everything. The girl hopes the prince suspects nothing while living in a mansion. Sabina even managed to feel calm while the prince lay covered with her hat and sunbathed. Suddenly, from under the hat, His Highness's voice was heard. The prince said he could smell the scent of peonies. Sabina, hearing this fact, thought that most likely it was the smell of her hair shampoo. And the prince had a sense of smell like a dog's. However, there was also a moment in the novel when Richard caught the smell coming from the main character. Since they are waiting for Fabian, the prince asks Viviana to tell something about herself. The girl replies that she has no interesting stories to tell. Ricardo remains firm. In his opinion, whether a story is interesting or not is for the listener to judge, not the cashier. Sabina is lost in thought. She already finds it hard to impersonate Viviana, let alone tell anything about herself. That's why they say a liar cannot live happily. The fifth prince decides to start a conversation anyway. He is interested in Viviana's age, and upon learning that she is 12, he says that during this time a couple of stories should have accumulated. Then he continues with his questions. He wonders if it is difficult to be the young lady's companion. Sabina has to reply that it is not difficult because the young lady doesn't like her, so they are not particularly close. When the prince asks why it is so, the girl tells the story that her mother, the head maid, and the young mistress know. We don't get along. His Highness asks another question. Does he want to know if there is anyone close to Miss Sabina, whom the prince is trying to find out about her? There is nowhere to go. And the girl says that in this house, no one values the young mistress. And it doesn't look like there is anyone she has a good relationship with, the illegitimate daughter of House Charlotte. She is not welcome here, and even if the prince knew how Mr. Simon treats her, he would not say that she is loved. Richard suggests that maybe Simon shows concern this way. Sabina states that such words hurt the young mistress. Getting up, the prince says calmly, "So it's good that Miss Charlotte doesn't hear this." Returning the hat to the girl's head, His Highness would like to advise the young woman to look at the things around her from a different angle. Because there is always a loophole, Sabina thinks she knows the prince, who was expelled from the palace for a confrontation with his mother. But she wonders out loud if, without tricks, the young lady will not be treated as just another family member. The prince, returning the hat to the girl, said that it was possible to say so, and began to leave the resting place. Sabina tried to stop His Highness. She offered to wait for Fabian, who had not yet returned from looking for the bird. Richard thinks that in the future, it is better not to bring Fabian. He addresses Viviana. He believes that the girl actually hates her mistress's family. Sabina looks intently at His Highness. If she realized one thing today, it is what the fifth prince is. His Highness looks more like a painting than a real person. Richard, like a mask, puts on a smile, and therefore, this smile has lost all sincerity. Caring for the prince, Sabina wonders what it's like to live without being able to smile sincerely. It's even sad. Upon returning to the annex, the girl was relieved that nothing bad had happened. She told Melissa that she no longer needed treats and that she could rest now. Mr. Simon is waiting for the girl in the room. Sabina definitely could not imagine such a surprise. The girl is worried if Simon really found out that she saw the prince, although no, then he wouldn't be so calm. But Sabina is still interested in knowing what brought the gentleman here. Simon reminds her that the last time they saw each other, Sabina said she would make him tea if he came to the annex. The girl doesn't believe that Mr. Simon came for such a trifle. Is this visit really just for a cup of tea? Sabina recalls the prince's words that perhaps Simon shows concern this way. And if you look at the things around you from a different angle, there is always a loophole. Indeed, recently, when Mr. Simon looked at Sabina, his gaze did not show contempt, but longing. It was a father's longing for his beloved son, but longing for his son is no excuse for the way Simon treated Sabina. The girl still hates him, but she shouldn't show it. Sabina says that Mr. Simon came suddenly, and the maid is not there, so it will take the girl a long time to prepare everything herself. She hopes Simon will scold her for the lack of hospitality and leave. Since such a situation has arisen, Mr. Simon suggests simply talking. Sabina is extremely surprised by this turn of events, as they never talk like a family. She was unclear what to expect. Having somewhat organized her thoughts, Simon asks the girl about the tea she prepared last time. He is interested in knowing how Sabina found out. Maybe she found out from her father. After listening to the interlocutor, the girl thinks that she hoped for attention in vain. He didn't come to her, but to find out about her dad. Sabina answers her grandfather's question with a short no. Simon thinks for a moment. Maybe his question seemed rude to the girl, so he decides to tell her that when Sabina's grandmother was alive. At that moment, the girl interrupts him. Sabina continues that her grandmother used to make chamomile tea with honey. She confirms that her father really didn't tell her anything. She just followed the recipe her dad left her. The girl says she read the recipe in her father's diary. Simon even resisted such news. He couldn't believe that Liam's diary existed. Now Simon wants to know where the diary is. He asks Sabina where she took it. Maybe she brought it with her or left it in her hometown. With her hands crossed on her knees, the heroine says that her father cherished the diary very much. So after the funeral, she burned all of Liam's things so that in the other world they would remain with her father, so that there would be no more diary. Of course, all this was a lie. The girl did not want to share the memories of her father with her grandfather. Simon sinks heavily into the chair. He asks if Sabina remembers what Liam wrote. Maybe there was something about him, about Simon. Sabina says she doesn't remember anything about the Charlotte family, except the tea recipe. The man thinks this is good, because if the diary fell into the wrong hands, it would shame House Charlotte again. The girl clarifies that since she answered all of Mr. Simon's questions, then apparently it is time for her to leave, because it is almost lunchtime, and they are probably waiting for him in the main building. Simon stops near the door. He asks his granddaughter not to leave, since the prince has arrived and visits the training ground every day. The gentleman also knows that it is not very pleasant to stay here and promises to send someone so that Sabina has company. As soon as Simon grabs the doorknob, Fabian bursts into the room shouting that Sabina left without saying anything. But then he notices his grandfather and falls silent. Simon makes a comment to his grandson about manners. Then the grandfather notices some object in Fabian's hands and asks what it is. The Duke's son is a little lost, but is forced to answer. Fabian shows his grandfather the bird and tells him that he caught a pigeon for Sabina. In this case, Simon asks Fabian to come to the annex more often so that the girl doesn't get bored here alone. Observing this situation, Sabina wonders if Mr. Simon really thinks that she and the Duke's son are close, so another side of his indifference is revealed. When the grandfather left, Fabian tries to find out from the girl why Simon came and what they talked about, but Sabina doesn't want to tell anything and asks him a counter question. Why did Fabian himself come to fight? In response, the Duke's son hands the trophy to the prince, declaring that he came to give him the bird and let Sabina take it. And how dare he leave while he was looking for the shot pigeon? Sabina looks at the corpse handed to her and doesn't know what to do in such a situation. Apparently, she will have to take it. The girl tells her brother that when they are alone, he constantly gets indignant. But in front of the prince, he cannot articulate two words. Fabian didn't like what his sister said during the competition, that the prince was more handsome and had a better character. Is the Duke's son really inferior in beauty to his highness? Her brother hopes that Sabina only said it because of the prince's status. Upon hearing Fabian's speech, the girl could only think about the nonsense her cousin was talking about. Looking at the dead bird in her hands, Sabina thought what to do with it. In the end, she decided that since it was a gift from the prince, she should probably keep the feathers. Fabian continued to praise himself. He was sure that he was a better archer than his highness. At least the targets indicated that. The Duke's son argued that the prince could only hit the bird because it was wounded and could not fly quickly. Sabina, looking closely, realizes that this is not just a bird, but a carrier pigeon. The girl unfolds a note that says he is quite hospitable. R did not notice anything. The adaptation is going better than expected. During lunch, the Duke asks a servant to send an envelope to the palace. When the servant leaves, the Duke expresses his displeasure with the fact that, out of all the available methods of transmitting information, the palace people demand the use of letters. Benjamin considers them too conservative. Mr. Simon explains that these conditions are set due to the magic barrier. In the end, it turned out that the palace is shrouded in ancient magic, and therefore, handwritten messages delivered by carrier pigeons remain the only way out. The girl sits thoughtfully over a pigeon and a note. This method of communication means that someone from the imperial palace was written to. Judging by the message, someone is reporting on the prince's current situation. The palace man is still monitoring the fifth prince, although he has been removed from the race for the throne. Perhaps it is Empress Florence who banished the prince from the palace. Sabina wonders if it is necessary to report this discovery to the prince. She wouldn't want to interfere in such matters. The heroine recalls what happened in the clearing how he offered to give her something as a souvenir. The girl realizes that the prince already knows, judging by his behavior. If the prince knew that he was being followed and still gave the carrier pigeon to Sabina, then it turns out that this is a test to see if she will actually kill the heroine if she fails. Although it is only to be safe that he took Fabian with him. Sabina thought so. There were still reasons for concern. In the original story, Richard hid his true power. And did he hide it until he went to the battlefield? And what if, instead of the sword, the prince used his ability to kill Sabine? The girl decides that she immediately needs to learn about the abilities of the imperial family. And there must be a way to do it. The devil revealed himself and fire rained from the sky, and the dead rose from their graves. The earth no longer bore fruit. Contaminated by filth, humanity plunged into chaos. At that moment, Lemarque Cesario obtained divine power and managed to imprison evil in lands where the sun never shone. God, rejoicing in the victory, gave people magic, and this became the foundation of a magical empire that lasted a millennium. Sabina closed the book. There is no valuable information. The girl already knew that the Cesario family is endowed with divine power, but nowhere is the essence of this power mentioned. And there was nothing in the novel except romance. Dr. Eugenia came to the girl to train her. Her appearance was very timely. The young woman hopes the doctor knows something, and so she asks if she knows the history of the empire well. Eugenia answers affirmatively to the student and points out that Sabina should have studied the history of the empire at the start of her studies. The girl explains her interest by the fact that the prince has been living here for some time, and that's why she wants to know everything possible about the imperial family. But in the mansion, the girl has no one to ask. Eugenia takes pity on the heroine. The doctor didn't know the girl was going through such a difficult time. The woman sits next to Sabina and promises to tell her everything. At that moment, the girl thought that, apparently, Dr. Eugenia is very sentimental. Sabina did not expect her to get so imbued with it. The student brings up the topic she needs. She heard that members of the imperial family can control space. The doctor confirms that this is so and begins to explain. It can be shown that the imperial family's ability is limited to moving people or objects, but in reality they have unlimited power. They can even create a space or seal someone. Sabina concludes that then they can go directly to the person and kill them. Eugenia says that is possible, but there is an easier way. They can simply move the sword to where the heart is, or even tear it out. And most likely people with this ability have many ways to kill a person. The girl imagined the whole picture described by the teacher and felt very uncomfortable. Unable to cope with her emotions and trembling, the girl asked the doctor a question that began to worry her. It turns out that the owners of such power are practically invulnerable. After thinking a little, Eugenia replies that it can be said so, because the reign of the Cesario family continues to this day. Only after the woman has told everything does she realize the girl's state. The doctor thinks she has given two cruel examples. Eugenia tries to fix everything and calm Sabina down. She says that abilities have not been shown in the imperial family for a long time. There is no need to be afraid of stories from the past. At this time, virtue is valued more than ability. Sabina, hearing the doctor, thought that she didn't understand what she was talking about, because in the original it was Richard who received divine power. If he used it easily, he would kill the girl and she wouldn't be able to stop him. The heroine became completely sad for him. The more she learned, the more defenseless she seemed to herself. Hence the idea arose whether the girl could survive. Dr. Eugenia pulls Sabina out of her thoughts and asks if everything is all right. Because the student has a sickly complexion, the girl assures that everything is fine. She is just surprised that the imperial family is so powerful. Melissa calls the room, asks the young lady to go out, and then looks around. The maid doesn't want anyone to hear what she says. In a whisper, Melissa says that she came because she met His Highness, and he is looking for some daughter of the head maid. The maid thought it was about the young lady who called herself like the prince. Sabina asks Melissa to tell Dr. Eugenia that she has urgent matters, and the girl herself is going to meet the prince. She thought there was still some time left, since the prince had finished training. His Highness waits for Viviana on the street. He is completely alone. Sabina doesn't understand why the prince is not with Fabian. Maybe Richard arrived earlier so as not to meet the duke's son. The girl apologizes for being late. The prince says everything is fine, because his training ended earlier than usual. Sabina understands that the prince is lying, but she doesn't understand at all why he is doing this. And what is happening now? The girl is surprised by the prince's suggestion, who suggests going for a walk because the weather is beautiful today. The prince looks expectantly at Viviana. Sabina does not want to go alone with him. She tries to refuse, saying that her mother will not allow her to go out. Noticing the prince's gaze, the girl offers to take a walk around the estate. She must dissuade His Highness from this idea. Richard pretends to think and says that he saw a small hole in the nearby fence. Sabina doesn't understand what nonsense the prince is talking about. Where could there be a hole in the wall of the Charlotte property? Richard gives no further information. He just makes an inviting hand gesture, inviting the girl to follow him. His Highness takes Viviana to a certain place on the fence. There really is a huge open hole there. Sabina stares at the hole in stupor. It is incomprehensible to her mind. Just a couple of days ago, there was nothing like this here. And why hasn't anyone noticed this yet? The prince offers to go, since there is no barrier anymore, because no one will know if they pass through here. Sabina pauses. She thinks that if the prince walked through the wall without moving a finger, then if she refuses now, he might break something for her too. The girl follows His Highness. She can't believe it, she just thinks they really went out. A random passerby stops when he sees such a large hole in a rather sturdy fence. Richard, as if out of nowhere, says that there are as many rude people in the world as there are people looking at someone else's house this way. Looking at his companion, Sabina thought that anyone would be surprised to see the size of the hole. But for a prince with his skills, this was nothing special. The prince takes Viviana to the store and orders her to select the chosen goods. The girl's arms are already covered with bags. In the checkout line, Sabina reflects that the role of a maid is difficult, but Richard has adapted well. He walks and chooses. Contrary to fears, this is a normal walk. The prince does not attract unnecessary attention and does not create problems. The girl decides that as long as nothing threatens her life, she will play the role of a maid. The prince calls Viviana, and if she has paid for the goods, he wants to move on. The girl, assuming the role, fulfills the order. With numerous purchases, Sabina feels extremely tired. She is sure that she will die from overwork before the prince kills her. Not finding anything better, the girl calls the prince by his name, Richard, who is walking lightly ahead. He turns around. Sabina asks the prince to take a break. His Highness agrees, saying that Viviana could have said earlier that she needed a rest. Richard says something absolutely unthinkable. He suggests that if it is too difficult, why not throw away a couple of things? The girl offers to make his life easier and rent a carriage, but the prince disagrees. Because this is a secret walk, Sabina doesn't understand at all why it was necessary to buy all these things. If the prince was going to throw them away, she is trying to reason with the prince, telling him that he paid for these things. The girl sighs. She is convinced again that the prince is crazy. She invites His Highness to enter the establishment and relax a little. He is incapable of empathy or simple emotions. A psychopath, in a word, Sabina now even respects the empress who gave birth to him and raised him for so long. But in the end, she also abandoned the prince and exiled him to the property of House Charlotte. The girl thought about all this when they were sitting at the table of the establishment. She cannot trust the prince over such a trivial act. He will start experiencing emotions when he meets the main character. Sabina tells the prince that he seems very affectionate, as he agreed to a break at the girl's request, even allowing her to sit next to him. Sabina is truly grateful to him. She considered him a ticking time bomb, but today he was very kind to Viviana, the daughter of a maid, thinking that the prince's arrival could turn out to be a good opportunity if she sides with him. The girl decides to act slowly. Sabina tells the prince that she is sure his servants also think they are lucky to have their master. Richard replies that he wouldn't be so sure, because people from the lower strata of society tend to prefer adults over children. The girl makes a decision. She wants to tell the prince something about the bird that His Highness shot, about the message the pigeon carried. Richard asks with a smile what was written in that message. Still, the prince knew it. Sabina replies that nothing special was written there. There was information about how His Highness settled in House Charlotte and what he did. The girl asked why the prince didn't ask about this from the beginning. Richard doesn't understand why he had to ask, since Viviana herself said that nothing like that was written in the message. Now the heroine understood that the prince's real test began with this question. Sabina continues her game, saying that she decided that it was still worth telling, because she is on His Highness's side. The prince is interested in why Viviana says she is on his side. The waitress appeared with tea just in time. Sabina managed to understand that she needed to choose her words more carefully. She couldn't miss the opportunity. The girl, putting on a little sadness, shares with the prince that for a long time she has been burdened by such a cold attitude. Looking at Viviana with some interest, the fifth prince asks why she has such dreams. Letting out sadness, Sabina replies that for a long time she has been overwhelmed by such a cold attitude, and that's why she wanted to leave. But her mother objected and the girl gave up, and when she met His Highness, she thought this was her chance. Melissa and Eugenia here are not Sabina's helpers, and she herself is too young to act alone, so she can only count on the prince. When he leaves, the girl will surely have mastered the magic of healing. Sabina asks the prince to hide her in his luggage while drinking tea when he leaves. Richard wonders why the girl needs all this, because it is very dangerous outside. The young woman decides that enough empty words. She tells the prince that she is ready and that if he takes her to the capital, she will happily obey any of his orders, but only if this order does not harm her. Putting down the cup and smiling strangely, the fifth prince said that Viviana should not worry about this. Sabina looks expectantly at His Highness, but he says nothing more and really didn't answer her proposal. After a pause, Richard makes a statement that even if Viviana says it, it cannot help him. Unfortunately, there are already enough people following his orders. The girl begins to lose hope. It seems her plan has failed. And then the prince, as if by chance, says that he doesn't know if there will be a place for her. Sabina understands that, judging by the prince's mood, she herself must create that opportunity. Richard clearly meant not the mansion maids, but his bodyguard. Sir Reynold. As far as Sabina knew, Reynold was the only one who arrived with the prince. Most likely, he was assigned to monitor the fifth prince and was the one who sent the letter to the empress. Sabina asks the prince if she understood correctly that he means Sir Reynold. Richard asks if Viviana can force Reynold to leave the mansion, to which the girl replies that she can handle this easily. The fifth prince is happy with the girl's willingness, and so as not to give himself away. He asks, as if mistrustfully, if it will really be easy. Sabina happily assures His Highness that it will not take long and that he can rely on her. Although the prince did not expect such an answer from the girl, she has many ways to solve his problem. The young woman was very tired of serving the prince all day, and now dreamed of one thing: simply going to bed. In the hallway, Sabina runs into Melissa. The young lady finds out if the maid fired Dr. Eugenia, and she replies affirmatively. Melissa stops the young woman, trying to tell her that something is happening in the room. Sabina and the maid enter the room and freeze on the threshold, where servants are placing many boxes and carrying furniture. One of the servants hands the paper to the young lady and informs her that these are gifts and a letter from Mr. Simon. Melissa is very surprised because the room is now simply unrecognizable. It no longer looks like a warehouse for unnecessary things. Among the gifts, the maid finds a dress. She shows it to the young lady and tells her that she had never seen such a luxurious dress. Here the maid notices Sabina's mood. She asks if she should return the gifts, since they are from Mr. Simon. The girl replies that there is no need to do that, and that she is happy with everything. The maid becomes interested in the content of the letter. Sabina replies that now on weekends, she has to attend dinner. To Melissa's delight at Simon's attention, the young lady replies that this is just another of his whims, and that it should not be given much importance. The maid does not think so. Recently, one of the maids in the kitchen told Melissa about Madame Clarissa, how she left. When Clarissa left the mansion, she looked like a wet dog. Everyone wondered who could have done this to her. The maid presents the version that Mr. Simon could have done this. Sabina knows that throughout the estate, only Mr. Simon and the Duke have abilities. And definitely, it was not Mr. Simon who did this to Madame. The girl, at the end of the conversation, asks to put all the gifts in the next room. The heroine did not know what happened to Madame Clarissa, and whoever made these gifts did not do it for Sabina's sake. And it seems that now she could understand the prince. The girl remembered the situation on the bridge. She, with the purchases in her hands, tried to catch up with the prince and asked him to wait. Richard turned at the girl's call and saw that she still had the bags and boxes, and began to take them out. Having taken all of Viviana's purchases, Richard did what he had suggested earlier. He simply threw everything in the trash. The bags and boxes flew into the river. Now Sabina understood that the prince bought all these things to feel free at least for a while. But nothing he bought and nothing Mr. Simon gave the girl had any value, which is what the heroine really wanted. So it's about escaping. Sitting at dinner, Sabina thought that every time she was here she felt terrible, because Mr. Simon could scold her at any moment. As if confirming the girl's thoughts, Simon turned to her, asking why Sabina hadn't come in the clothes he had gifted her. The young woman looked at her grandfather with a hint of incomprehension. Indeed, among the gifts there was a dress, but Sabina believed it was for her to wear at a tea party. The girl remembered the events of 3 years ago. The maids helped the young lady get ready and tell her that she must wear clothes appropriate to her status. The already calm Sabina meets Simon. He couldn't believe the girl was going out like this. He said that she always chooses what reveals her true status. From then on, no matter what dress Sabina wore, Simon ridiculed her every time. The girl's clothes became more and more modest to avoid condemnation, and the servant's attitude towards the young lady became colder and colder. While helping Sabina get ready for dinner, Melissa offers to wear the dress the young lady was gifted. Sabina disagrees because no matter what she puts on, they won't like it anyway, so she asks the maid to prepare normal clothes for her. Sabine looked at Mr. Simon and thought that last time he also talked about clothes. But the problem is not the clothes, but the person she is not liked by. Smiling, the girl, however, decides to reply that she decided not to wear a dress for dinner, so as not to accidentally stain it during the meal. Simon doesn't understand such experiences, because if this happened, Sabine could simply buy a new dress. Benjamin interrupts the conversation about clothes. He wants to know how the girl's days are going and what she does while living in the annex. Sabina doesn't understand such an interest in herself, but replies that she has breakfast, reads to fill in the gaps in her studies, and sometimes goes for a walk. The girl lowers her head and apologizes for not devoting all her time to studying. She thinks that now she will be scolded because she is having fun instead of studying. The Duke has to explain that he did not ask that question to embarrass the girl. He was simply interested in how she felt in a different environment. Sabina lifts her head. She didn't understand what was happening. She looks at those sitting at the table. Mr. Simon doesn't look at the girl, but he doesn't seem as arrogantly calm as he usually appears. Silently, Fabian looks away and takes his plate, looking a little annoyed or uncomfortable. The heroine has a feeling that they are trying to apologize. The other day she suffered because of Madame Clarissa, and immediately afterwards she was exiled to the annex. The men must feel guilty, which means they sent the gifts as consolation. Benjamin wanted to discuss more lessons with the girl, but given recent events, of course, it might be worth taking a short break if the girl doesn't mind. Sabina thought for a moment. It will be difficult to continue studying while the prince lives on the estate. For classes with Dr. Eugenia, you need to learn a lot of theory, and she assigns a lot of homework. The girl accepts the Duke's proposal to go on vacation, because the prince will probably notice if the teacher visits the annex. Fabian, who had remained silent until then, rudely asks when the prince will leave. His grandfather advises the boy to be careful with his words and follow his sister's example. Continuing the meal, Sabina thought that she had finally been praised, although at Fabian's expense. Maybe she should thank him for this. The Duke's son, embarrassed, asks permission to leave the table, as he has finished eating. It is obvious that something is irritating him. Observing Fabian, Sabina thought that it seemed he had something to say, and since he had finished eating, she should follow him. The girl caught up with her brother Fabian, who didn't expect anyone, got scared and asked him what he had forgotten here. The sister clarifies that the boy was talking about the prince. Fabian pretends that he didn't mean any of that and initially said nothing. Seeing her brother's reaction, Sabina notices that they clearly have something to discuss. When Fabian asks her what exactly they should discuss, the girl doesn't answer specifically. She is interested in what the Duke's son thinks about the prince. Deciding that Sabina also noticed something, Fabian furiously asks if the fifth prince seems strange to her. The Duke's son continues to say that he is sure that the prince is one of those who only pretend to be kind. But in reality he is not, and in general he is very suspicious. After listening to her brother, Sabina sighs. She would like to say that Fabian's thoughts are not just suspicions, because the prince can destroy House Charlotte. The Duke's son is serious and warns Sabina to try to stay away from His Highness. Calmly looking at her brother, the girl clarifies if he said everything. Fabian, giving a majestic look, gestures with his hand and tells her that if she understood everything, then she can leave. Sabina doesn't leave, because that's not what she wanted to talk about. The girl shows Fabian a note and asks him if he can forge this handwriting and write a letter. When asked why she should do such a thing, Sabina asks a counter question. Didn't Fabian become the best in the class in terms of academic performance last semester because he forged his report card? The Duke's son gets scared and falls into a brief stupor at such information from his sister. Recovered from his stupor, Fabian covers the girl's mouth with both hands, asking her to be quieter, or better yet, be silent. The boy looks around to see if his father and grandfather really know this, but they said nothing at dinner. Sabina says that only she knows it. Fabian doesn't understand at all how she found out such information about him and demands an answer from his sister. The girl calmly explains that just by looking at the report card, she realized that a fool like her brother couldn't be the best in the class. And as soon as she had the conscience to do it, Fabian demands that she stop talking about things she doesn't know. He shares that every time he goes to school, they always tell him that he must study well, and they have high hopes for him. All this puts a lot of pressure on Fabian. He tells his sister that she probably doesn't even know what this is like. Sabina thought that she really had no idea, because simply no one cared about her. The girl put herself in her brother's shoes. He, surrounded by attention and all sorts of support, forged the report card. But in such circumstances, it would never have occurred to her to do such a thing. Fabian clarifies if it is true that the girl will tell her father and grandfather everything, but Sabina assures that it is none of his business. She shows Fabian the note again and repeats whether he can forge the handwriting and write a letter. Sabina decides to set a condition. If Fabian manages, she will continue to remain silent. We can assume that this will be their little secret. Fabian, under so much pressure, agrees, but sets his own condition that if Sabina gets caught, she won't tell anyone that he is involved. Sabina, with a mysterious and slightly threatening look, tells her brother what to write in the fake letter. Fabian is afraid of what he will have to do to keep his sister silent. People burst into the room shouting that the man is here, and he must be arrested. Sir Reynold doesn't understand what is happening, and why these people are breaking in with a desire to arrest him. The person accompanying the prince wants to know what is going on here, why he is being treated so rudely. The Duke appears, accusing him of espionage. Reynold, already on his knees, tries to find out from him what all this means. Benjamin shows the paper and asks if Sir Reynold really means that he does not recognize this letter. Reynolds cannot believe what he sees. He doesn't understand why the Duke has the letter. The Duke stands next to Reynolds with a letter in his hand. His appearance bodes no good. Melissa and another maid discuss the arrest of Sir Reynolds. The second maid advises Melissa not to waste time with the girl, but to try to make a good impression on Mr. Fabian. Melissa says goodbye to her interlocutor. Mentally, she smiles. No one knows that the letter was discovered not by Mr. Fabian, but by Madame Sabina. The maid conveys the lady's request to the Duke to meet her once the interrogation is over. Benjamin tells the maid to tell the lady that she should come in the evening. Melissa nods understandingly and thinks that surely her lover will be very important. In the evening, a meeting took place between the Duke and Sabina. The uncle told the girl that everything was as she said. The letter was sent to the Imperial Palace. Apparently, Sir Reynolds received instructions to explore her weaknesses. The Duke says that Reynolds claims he was only reporting on the prince's condition, but the evidence suggests otherwise. The girl felt sorry for Sir Reynolds, but in any case, they won't torture him, but they will simply return him to the palace. Sabina asks if the Duke has any idea why His Majesty sent a spy. Maybe he wants to use House Charlotte. Upon hearing his niece, Benjamin was shocked by the girl's sayings. Ignoring the Duke's reaction, Sabina continued, "The fight for the throne among the princes is in full swing. Maybe His Majesty needs House Charlotte to place his son, the second prince, on the throne." Duke Charlotte, looking at Sabina, thought, the girl is only 11 years old, but she is capable of reasoning at the same level as adults. Benjamin recalled how Sabina came to him. It was a late visit, but the girl claimed that it was very important. She carried a box in her hands and said that a couple of days ago Fabian gave her a captured bird. But the girl realized that there was a letter. The Duke listened to his niece and accepted the paper she was offering. Upon reading the content of the letter, Benjamin was surprised and dissatisfied. Benjamin explains that what is written in the letter is not enough to influence House Charlotte. Sabina replies that the situation still leaves much to be desired. The girl says that now it is not necessary to spoil relations with the Empress. It is worth hiding for a while, and in the future, when the Empress needs help, she simply won't receive it. Benjamin listened to his niece with pleasure. He points out that Sabina will be a wonderful politician. The Duke even dared to say that, in this regard, she is superior to Fabian. Sabina is happy to hear such words, but she has never been praised without mentioning Fabian. The Duke says that now he is indebted to the girl, and that if she wants something, tell him. At the end of the conversation, Sabina asks what to do with Sir Reynolds' letter. Since the situation has been clarified, the Duke replies that there is no need to keep the letter, since he has already read it, which means he can burn it. Nor will he tear it, as long as no one sees it. Benjamin turned at the door and asked the girl what she would do with the prince. Sabina replied that it seemed the prince was not involved in this, so he would probably just monitor him. And if something happened, he would send him back to the palace. The Duke points out that this is a reasonable decision and says goodbye to the girl. After bowing in farewell, Sabina only thinks that when the prince is sent to the palace, she will also leave. The girl hopes that the psychopathic prince will be satisfied with his action. Simon yells at Liam. He is dissatisfied with his son's behavior. His father believes that Liam cannot understand what is right and what is wrong because he is obsessed with a woman, and he cannot see beyond his own nose and how long his useless love will last. Last, the son who received a slap does not answer his father. He just looks with a slightly guilty smile. Simon continues yelling that his son will definitely regret his decision. Liam approaches his father and, without raising his voice, tells him that his father will regret it. Mr. Simon wakes up with a loud cry. He doesn't immediately understand where he is. His memories are too vivid in his mind. Having caught his breath, the old man realizes that it was a dream, just a bad dream, and he is in his room. Benjamin knocks on his father's door, noticing that Simon is resting. The son offers to come by later, but his father assures him that everything is fine, and he asks if Benjamin was in his room. The Duke replies that he visited Sabina and made sure the room was furnished with everything she needed. Simon is surprised that the girl chose the most abandoned room in the annex, but he is sure that she asked for this room because she misses the old house. Mr. Simon believes it is time for Sabina to get used to the Charlotte status. Approaching the window, he says that the girl strongly resembles her father and then remembers their first meeting. The servant brought the girl. She introduces herself as Sabina and says she is delighted to meet Mr. Simon. Simon yells at the servant why they brought her, because he said he didn't want to see the girl. The servant tries to explain what the Duke ordered, but Simon orders him to be silent. He orders that from now on everything related to this child should be discussed with the head maid, but not with him. Simon tried to escape the past. As soon as he saw his granddaughter, he remembered his son, whom he had greatly offended, and since then the nightmares have worsened. In his nightmares, Simon begged his son not to leave. He asked for forgiveness, kneeling, which he had never done before, but the result was always the same. One day, the gentleman asked the head maid, as if by chance, how the girl was adapting. Vanessa sighed and began to tell Simon that apparently the change of situation had affected the girl, and she had become greedy, constantly demanding new dresses, and this was affecting the servants. Simon, who had not yet resigned himself to his son's death, could not hear that his granddaughter was enjoying luxury. Meeting Sabina in the hallway, he told the girl that he could not believe she was dressed like this, and that perhaps he should personally check the girl's wardrobe. Sabina apologized and said she would change clothes and ran away abruptly. Simon did not understand whether he had really offended the girl with his words. His first thought was that whatever happened, she is his granddaughter and they are a family. But after Simon decided that the blood of House Charlotte flows in the girl, and that he must be strict, Sabina simply needs proper training due to her origin. In the end, Liam escaped the seven and died. Now Simon is forced to raise the ideal son of House Charlotte from his granddaughter. Upon learning that Benjamin wants to assign a governess to Sabina, Simon suggests Madame Clarissa's candidacy, who became a widow and started tutoring. The Duke remembers that Clarissa is his brother's ex-fiancée. Simon convinces him that she will be the teacher whom the child can admire, and furthermore, they could improve their relationship again. Observing Sabina's progress in training, the grandfather was sure that he had made the right decision, because since Madame Clarissa arrived, the girl is simply unrecognizable. Simon does not want to repeat the same mistake he made with Liam. Subsequently, Benjamin tells his father what Clarissa did to the girl. Such information unsettles Simon, and the glass falls from his hands. Upon learning that Clarissa intentionally burned Sabina, Mr. Simon goes to look for her, and he is determined to deal with this. Simon finds the teacher. She definitely didn't expect it, and asks him what brought the gentleman here. Without waiting for an answer, she says she needs to talk to the Duke. Simon has no intention of talking. He is filled with anger and uses magical powers on Madame Clarissa. The woman tries to ask what is happening and why she was treated like this. Simon orders Clarissa to be silent. How dare she harm his granddaughter? Does the woman really believe she was called for this? Madame was sure that this was exactly the case. Wasn't she called by the gentleman because he hated the girl? And if they didn't call her to mock the girl, then there was absolutely no reason to call her here. Simon is horrified. He doesn't understand how she can say such nonsense. He only wanted Clarissa to feel again the comfort and calm she had when she practically became part of House Charlotte. Tears welled up in Clarissa's eyes at the mention of that time. She felt hurt and offended. The next moment, the woman began to laugh hysterically. Simon could not understand what was happening to her. Having mastered her emotions, Clarissa managed to stand up and announced to Simon that he was still as cruel as before. Simon was lost, felt uncomfortable. Was it really happening again like with Liam? Lowering his head, the old man said that he tried to correct his mistakes, but everything only got worse. Benjamin, in response to his father's revelations, said that his brother no longer existed, but that those who remained needed to continue living. Looking out the window indifferently, Simon replied that he knew, but Liam would never do that to a girl. The Duke, trying to reassure his father, said that the girl had grown up smart and strong, and after his words he began to think. Indeed, as proof of his negligence, Sabina distanced herself from them by raising a wall and facing everything alone. Benjamin shares with Simon how smartly the girl solved the last situation, that for a moment she forgot about her age. It seems to him that Sabina is even superior to her brother. He wants to convey to his father that excessive care can turn into poison. Simon sinks into a chair. He is tired. Life has become very exhausting for him. The prince speaks to the girl and assures her that Viviana has no right to refuse his proposal. Sabina finds herself in front of a table that is full of various desserts. This is very unexpected for her and causes her delight. Richard gallantly pulls up a chair. He helps Viviana sit down at the table and says that everything has been specially prepared for her, because the Empress called Sir Reynolds to the palace to reprimand, thanks to which the prince is now free. Sabina modestly says that she does not feel comfortable eating alone in the presence of His Highness. The prince assures Viviana that she has nothing to worry about. He doesn't like sweets, but the girl seems to like them very much. During the walk, she constantly looked around at different desserts. Sabina remembers that it was indeed so. But did the prince really notice? The girl has to admit that she has never eaten anything like this before. The prince is surprised by this information. His Highness asks if the young lady is so greedy that she doesn't share desserts with her friend. Not knowing what else to say, the girl admits that a lady cannot afford such a thing, and she herself thought that no one treats her like a lady. Not even the chefs asked her what she liked. Sabina remembers that she only saw such desserts at Fabian's birthday. Mr. Simon didn't want the girl to be in sight and therefore kept her at a distance. In comparison, on Sabina's birthday there wasn't even a cake. Everything was limited to a normal meal. The more the girl thought about it, the more she realized that she did not live like a lady at all. The girl admits that this is so, but the prince absolutely doesn't understand why the young lady is treated this way. Having appeared calm, Sabina advises the prince to ask the Duke, or Mr. Simon, and by the way, she wonders if the prince is satisfied with the result of his work. His Highness is more than satisfied with the result, and as promised, he will help the girl leave the Charlotte mansion. The heroine thanks the prince, but she herself thinks that if she runs away from Richard when she leaves the mansion, Sabina's previous destiny will change. The prince, as it happens, utters the phrase regarding poor Sir Reynolds, in response to the girl's answer that she cannot go against the prince's orders. Richard points out that she is not as ruthless as she tries to appear. In fact, Sabina is worried about the situation with Reynolds, but clarifies that she did what His Highness wanted. The prince sarcastically says yes, that he is a villain, and then invites the innocent maid to start with dessert. Sabina tries the dessert and is completely delighted. It is very tasty, and the delicate cream perfectly complements the taste of the tea. Observing the girl, Richard notices that Viviana seemed to like it. Sabina looks at the table. She can't believe she ate so much herself. After all, she also needs to offer the prince at least something. The girl's choice falls on a cake with large strawberries, probably very tasty. Sabina pushes the plate towards the prince and asks him to try it too. His Highness tries a piece. The girl watches him, thinks, even a psychopath likes sweets. Maybe this will help him feel better. After trying the dessert, Richard finds it quite good. At that moment, the heroine thinks there isn't a single person in the world who doesn't like sweets. Taking advantage of the moment, Sabina says there is a rumor that the South is engulfed in war, so they never dreamed of such sweets. Compared to that place, it is simply paradise. Richard shames Viviana, because it is ugly to rejoice in the misfortune of others. After swallowing His Highness's comment, Sabina thought that Richard was too intelligent to be a psychopath. The prince says enough talking, and that Viviana had better eat a little more. Left alone, the prince thought that Charlotte was a strange family, pretending the girl was indifferent to them, and trying with all their might to hide their care and concern, people whose words and actions are opposite poles. The prince's thoughts flowed like a calm river. The girl is smart, and tries so hard to please him that he is even willing to turn a blind eye to the fact that she is trying to deceive him and impersonate someone else. She is devoted and looks like a puppy. His Highness was disturbed by a servant. He arrived with the message that Mr. Simon was asking him to come over. Richard was even a little happy. It seems the issue with his escort was finally resolved. The prince tells the servant to guide him. Having led His Highness to the door, the servant informs that Mr. Simon is waiting inside and asks His Highness to come in. Simon meets the prince sitting at the table. He greets His Highness and invites him to sit down. The gentleman asks if any problems arose during His Highness's stay at the Charlotte estate. The prince replies with a slight smile that what problems can arise if he is surrounded by so many servants. Sitting opposite Simon, the prince still wants to know why the gentleman invited him and what he wants to talk about. Simon wishes to discuss matters related to Sir Raynal with His Highness. Richard says he is flattered by the attention towards the exiled prince and wants to return the favor. The prince leaves house, Charlotte the right to decide Sir Reynald's fate. After listening to the prince's speech, Mr. Simon thanks him for his understanding. The prince continues, but his mother is too heartless to do this to the people who protected her son. Richard thinks he has done everything he planned, but needs to make sure that the distance between the Empress and Charlotte grows. He needs to earn Simon's trust. Who would have thought that the sweetest woman in the Empire would do such a thing? Simon tells the prince that His Majesty claims that she had nothing to do with this. He is sure that his mother is very worried about the prince. In response to the old man's speech, the prince replies that words about concern are nice, but that he will never believe them. Sometimes it is very difficult to realize that loved ones change. Leaning back in his chair, the prince continued that only at that moment, when a sword was put to his neck, he realizes how foolish he was. The prince spoke from personal experience. The prince finished his speech by getting up from his chair and walked to the portrait hanging on the wall of the room. Looking at the portrait, His Highness commented that it looked like a friendly family, although there was no young lady here. Simon justifies the girl's absence from the portrait, saying that she recently moved to the mansion. Richard looked at Simon and thought that he reacted strangely when talking about the girl. Aloud, the prince says it's a shame he never had the luck to see her, because as she is from the family, Charlotte must be extraordinarily beautiful. Maybe Mr. Simon just doesn't want them to see each other and is hiding the girl. Simon doesn't like the fifth prince's speeches and starts getting irritated. Once composed, the gentleman explains that his granddaughter still has a lot to learn before appearing before His Highness. Richard smiles at Simon's excuses. Does the old man really think so? Approaching another portrait and examining it, an interesting idea occurs to the prince. Since the girl is Simon Charlotte's granddaughter, she could even become empress. Mr. Simon's hands involuntarily clenched into a fist. He is trying with all his might to control himself. Having said that he was joking, the prince is about to leave and asks for a gentleman to accompany him. Anyone who does not interfere in daily life and is not too busy with work suits him. Simon briefly accepts the prince's terms and watches him leave the room. Left alone, Simon is lost in thought after such a conversation. With his hands still clenched into fists, how could an empress with a good heart give birth to such a child? Something more besides the attack must have happened. Simon suggested that the empress exiled the prince not as punishment, but to hide something. The problem is that it is unknown who is behind that incident with the letter. It may be that it was the prince who staged everything. Simon has a feeling that they are getting involved in something dangerous. Richard walked down the corridor and thought, from his actions, Simon knows nothing. He doesn't even know what his granddaughter wants. He says with his mouth that he loves her, but in reality, it is not visible. Before the prince's eyes appeared the image of his mother, with tears in her eyes. When she says that she did everything for Richard, he even stopped before this turn of his subconscious, deciding that it was some nonsense. Recalling the conversation with the girl on the lawn, Richard realized that she was his only way out. In a good mood, His Highness goes to meet the girl when he hears a voice, saying that apparently he is in a good mood. Richard turns around and sees a woman uttering a phrase about the mood. Sabina tried to read sitting at the table, but Fabian, sitting on the floor, was trembling so much that it was impossible for her to read. The girl cannot stand it and bends down and loudly demands that Fabian, a swin of Charlotte, stop, which frightens her brother greatly. The Duke's son doesn't understand how she can be so calm. Sabina explains that, firstly, they cannot be discovered, and secondly, if they suspect something, the boys will pretend they don't know anything, yes, and even if they are caught, there is no need to worry so much. When Fabian asked why she shouldn't worry, her sister replied that they would die regardless of whether they worry or not, which horrifies the boy. Fabian panics, mumbles that they are finished, and in general it is not clear how he agreed to this. Noticing that Sabina is leaving, he starts to find out where she was heading. The girl is tired of her brother's chatter, asks him to be quiet. Otherwise, she will say who forged that letter. The Duke's son, frightened once again, demands to say that what was said before is a lie. The sister laughs to herself that Fabian fell for it. Approaching the door, Sabina turns around and tells her brother that if he is so scared, he should stay here and not go anywhere. She will take responsibility herself if something happens. The Duke's son is absolutely lost and frightened. He doesn't know how to behave in such a situation. Sabina leaves. Walking down the corridor, she thinks, cowardly Fabian, cowardly little Charlotte. It seems to her that everyone in House Charlotte is written to keep their mouths shut at the right times. The heroine reached the prince's door, knocked, but no one answered her. Strangely, Sabina thought that the conversation about Sir Reynolds had ended. If she waited, they would notice her. The girl decides that the best thing to do is to leave a note and leave. She enters the room and there is paper and a pen on the table. After sitting down at the table and starting to write, Sabina wants to do everything quickly, because if someone sees her here, there will be no problems later. People enter the room. The girl barely has time to hide under the table and becomes an involuntary listener to the conversation. The woman says that the prince seems to like being in House Charlotte. He looks better than in the palace. Sabina has never heard this woman's voice. She is Empress Florence. She asks Richard what he means by saying that he didn't betray her. The fifth prince replies with a smile that he doesn't understand what the Empress is talking about. Florence did not order Sir Reynolds to look for the weaknesses of House Charlotte, which leads her to the conclusion that he received the order from someone else. The Empress continues that Sir Reynolds is a loyal knight of the imperial family, and he could not betray them. Richard suggests that his mother was mistaken, and this knight was never loyal. Raising her voice, the woman pointedly asks Richard if this was his doing. His Highness still insists that he doesn't understand anything and doesn't know what they are talking about. But in any case, it's not him. Florence doesn't understand what the prince is trying to achieve. He simply disgraced her, since no one believed her when she said she had nothing to do with what happened. The woman says that because of the prince, she almost lost two important allies. Although they said they believed her, doubts were visible, and all because she has no proof. The Empress is sure she knows it was Richard, but she said nothing to protect him. Although the prince believes he deserves at least gratitude. Covering her face with her hands, Florence asks not to create problems until the crown prince selection ceremony is over. Richard says that he also has the right to become emperor, but the Empress doesn't want that. The following words he heard seemed to hurt Richard. He heard that he simply wasn't worthy. The woman calls the fifth prince a terrible person. She says that he cannot rule people and manage their lives. Even if all previous heirs disappear, he will never become emperor. As she prepares to leave, she advises Richard to sit quietly and not cause trouble. Stopping by the door for a minute, the Empress says that when Richard grows up, he can go wherever he wants. But whatever he does, he will be a stranger everywhere. Sabina tries not to breathe under the table. His Highness stops the woman right by the door. He expresses to her how she could say she was protecting him, that she would stop lying, but she should admit that she couldn't accept the fact that she gave birth to a monster. Like him, approaching the Empress's face, and continues to accuse her that she tried to kill him because she didn't like that her son was different from others. And when that failed, she exiled him to House Charlotte. And even her husband didn't know why he abandoned his son. Sabina, still under the table, couldn't believe that the Empress tried to kill Richard. If the girl had the right to hear such a thing, even if by accident, unable to withstand her son's pressure, Florence screams in her heart why she didn't give up sooner. Richard moves away from the woman after such a statement, and the Empress, on the contrary, inflames her emotions. Looking at her son, Florence bravely asks him why he looks like this, if he will really try to strangle her again like last time. After hearing such an assertion, the prince sighs deeply and agrees with his mother's conclusion. His Highness's hand reaches out to the Empress, instilling animal fear in her. The prince, approaching his mother's face again, says that she is still running and hiding behind the mask of her nature, and the realization that it was she who made him this way. Richard grabs the doorknob, but continues to say that even now the Empress chooses the path of a coward. The woman flees the room as fast as possible from her son's room. His Highness remains standing in front of the closed door. It seems he has said everything he could. Sabina begins to worry about how long she will have to hide under the table. She has already heard many things that were not intended for her. Hearing footsteps, the girl covers her nose and mouth with her hands so that her breathing cannot be heard. And she really hopes that Richard will not approach the table. But Sabina's hopes are not justified. The prince discovers her hiding place. The girl gets scared and feels uncomfortable. She tries to say that she didn't hear anything. Falling to the floor next to her, the prince caresses the girl's cheek, as if calming her. His Highness asks why Viviana is trembling. If he is really scaring her, his face expresses some kind of compassion. Richard suddenly hugs the girl. She is completely lost and doesn't understand how to behave now. The prince asks if she heard everything. He asks if Viviana heard that the Empress was the first to try to kill him, so that she remembers it well, because the girl is on his side and followed all his orders. She has nothing to fear. His Highness, the fifth prince, has few followers, so he values everyone. And each of them, a child who attacked his own mother, although it turned out that it was the Empress who wanted to kill him. A snap of the fingers pulls Sabina out of her thoughts and brings her back to reality. Sitting at the table with a pen in hand, Dr. Eugenia came to give a lesson. She asked if everything was all right. The girl replied that she was just thinking. Eugenia takes Sabina's notebook to check and skim through it. She asks if the young lady plans to enroll in the academy. The student indifferently says that the teacher really believes they will be allowed to enroll, although she would have reached the doctorate level by then. Realizing that her student will not be able to concentrate today, Eugenia takes out a box and offers the girl something to try. There is a magic detector in the box. They already know Sabina's abilities, but the doctor suggests checking how strong they are. Maybe this will encourage the girl. Sabina brings her hand closer to the detector with interest, but the device shows the number 0 on the screen. Eugenia starts shaking the detector. She cannot understand why such indicators exist. Indicators. It suddenly breaks because such indicators cannot exist. The girl suggests that maybe the force is too high. The doctor says that then the marker would indicate that it has been exceeded, and for low indicators there are corresponding numbers. After thinking for a moment, Eugenia remembers that she had already read about this somewhere, and starts flipping through books and notes. After searching for information, it becomes clear why Sabina cannot heal other people. The doctor explains that this is a sacred power. All this time, mana flowed exclusively inside the body and could not manifest. Sabina says she doesn't believe in gods, and there are no signs of power in her. Eugenia continues explaining that it is not a matter of faith. This is God's choice, and the sign will appear on the body when the girl is baptized, and takes her second name. Sacred power works more simply. Unlike magic, God is omnipotent and can grant anything if you pray diligently. Sabina doesn't understand what simply praying is, and not having to learn or memorize anything. The teacher says that, in short, the girl is capable of healing any physical damage and illness. There are exceptions. Sacred power is not capable of curing mental disorders, such as attention deficit disorder. During this explanation, Sabina thought that she could not heal Richard. Eugenia asks if the girl plans to tell the Duke and Simon about her discovery, because when the men find out, they will probably be happy. Sabina admits that she lied about the reason why she wants to develop her abilities. The girl says she wants to help her mother, who suffers from an unknown illness. But Sabina is not even allowed to approach her, so the girl asks the doctor to keep everything secret until she meets her mother. After listening to the student, Eugenia promises not to tell the Duke and Mr. Simon anything until Sabina does it herself. The girl remained in the corridor with a sad look. She needed to figure out how to leave the mansion with Ricardo, but since that day, he hadn't left his room. They asked Sabina if she was really waiting for the prince again. Sabina raised her head, and Fabian was in front of her. He told his sister that there was no need to be on guard here. The prince had been sick for several days. Perhaps his muscles ached due to intense training, and considering how he behaved, he must have been in a lot of pain. Sabina listened to Fabian and stopped standing still. She set off. Her brother wondered where she was going. The girl replied without hesitation that she was going to visit a sick person. Seeing the maids, Sabina hides behind a column and hopes they don't notice her, after which the girl is surprised, thinking that hiding when she is in the main building is becoming a habit. Approaching the door to the prince's room, Sabina hopes that Richard is still awake and knocking, but a brief word is heard from behind the door, in the distance. The door still opens. The prince is in bed. He is indignant because he said he wanted to be alone. The girl tells him that she is Viviana and receives permission to enter. She apologizes for the disturbance and approaches the prince to find out how he is. Approaching, Sabina sees that the prince is really unwell. He is sweating a lot, but for some reason no one is taking care of him. Is it really due to his age? Such pain is a common occurrence for growing magical ability owners, but this can be easily avoided with the help of magic. And for some reason, the prince suffers alone. Does he really want to hide his abilities like Sabina? Rising up on the pillows, Richard asks why Viviana came. Because last time she ran away, and now she didn't come to blackmail him. However, it doesn't matter. Richard thinks that Viviana herself heard everything, and now knows what the Empress did. But everything he said then is true. Sabina tensed up, but was able to say that she didn't understand what the prince was talking about. Since birth, Richard was different from others. He didn't understand why his father loved his mother. He didn't understand why his mother cried every time she saw her son and couldn't answer. The prince doesn't understand what emotions are, and this drove the Empress crazy. She led a righteous life, but still gave birth to a degenerate. His mother considers Richard the main mistake of her life. The girl says that this cannot be true, that the prince is the kindest person she has ever met. Richard stops her. She shouldn't talk as if she knows him, she doesn't know him. And by her actions, Viviana has already proven it. She is on his side. His Highness invites the girl to sit next to him. She obeys, but at the same time asks if the prince needs her help. He confirms that he does. Smiling strangely, the prince tells the girl that he doesn't want to think about anything anymore, and asks Viviana to kill him. Sabina doesn't believe what she hears, because if she does this, she won't have to be afraid him ever again. The girl still decides to clarify if she understood correctly that the prince wants to die. Richard takes his interlocutor's hands and places them on his neck. He asks Viviana to do it, because both Richard and the Empress want this, and Sabina will be able to live without worrying about death. She takes a more comfortable position to perform such an act. Still with her hands on the prince's neck, the girl stops, with a slight smile. Richard wonders if Viviana really lacks determination. The girl replies that it is not so easy to kill a person. She asks if the prince himself killed. He replies that he tried, but it didn't work. He asks if Viviana thinks he is strange. Sabina removes her hands from the prince's throat, as if he expected a different answer from her, and was simply deceiving him so that she could survive. The prince was born to kill her. If you think about it a little, the heroine herself doomed him to this fate. If she hadn't offered to correct the story, the prince could have lived and felt like a full-fledged person. Richard touches the girl's cheek as he says that she and her mother both tried to kill him. But why does Viviana have such a strange expression on her face? Sabina tried not to sympathize with the prince. It would be better if she avoided him. Then she wouldn't have found out that the prince was suffering just like her. The girl started crying. She tells Richard that there is nothing strange about it, because someone doesn't have a leg. Someone is born with one eye, but this is not their fault. Sabina herself wants the prince to believe in something like that. After listening to the girl, the prince changes places with her. He remembers that Viviana said she wanted to run away. He offers to run away together, to where no one will know them. Fabian finds Sabina coming down from the second floor. He wants to know why his sister was there, if she was visiting the prince, but the girl replies that she was going to her old room, and the prince started classes a long time ago. Although this is not entirely true, after that incident, Sabina and Richard met every day to plan their escape. Following Sabina, the brother wants to know if the prince really likes her. The girl asks him to give at least one reason why she shouldn't like him. Fabian expresses that he is worried about Sabina, and in general the prince is very strange. The girl clarifies what her cousin means when talking about strangeness. The duke's son explains that the prince forced Sabina to forge that letter. How could a normal person do such a thing? The sister promises to be more careful and wants to leave. Fabian is sure that she says it so that he doesn't betray the girl. Without paying any more attention to Fabian, Sabina moves on. She needs Richard because she wants to escape this hell. Mr. Simon and Duke Benjamin are sitting at the table. Simon reprimands the newcomers for being late. Fabian apologizes for being late and explains that he and Sabina met on the way, and they got carried away in conversation, as they hadn't seen each other for a week. Today's table is varied. It seems too much for 4 people. If Sabina had known there would be so much food, she wouldn't have eaten her fill before. But now she has to force herself to fill up. Mr. Simon notices Sabina's state and asks her what is wrong. Maybe she doesn't like it, because it seems like the girl is forcing herself to eat. Sabina tries to use the excuse that she ate something bad and her stomach hurts. The Duke is not happy about this, because only the best chefs cook in his house. But now they will bring the one who cooked for the girl. Sabina stops such impulses and says that she simply feels like she has gained weight. But the girl doesn't understand why her words provoked such a reaction. Mr. Simon reacts quickly to Sabina's new version. He says out loud that she hasn't fully recovered. The girl doesn't understand at all what is happening again. She is a little frightened by so much attention to her person. Simon doesn't understand why his granddaughter cares about such things when she looks great for her age. The Duke asks the maid to put another plate for Sabina, because in his opinion, the girl needs to gain weight. And for that, she needs to eat well. In the morning, Sabina realizes that she didn't get enough sleep and blames House Charlotte, which gives her nothing but trouble. After yesterday's dinner, the girl even fled from the turkey while sleeping. Melissa finds Miss in bed. Sabina says it is still morning, but she is tired and wants to sleep a little longer. The maid cheerfully says that if the lady is tired, then she needs to eat to gain strength. To the girl's objections that she cannot even take a sip of water, Melissa offers to look at the menu. And then the young lady will change her mind. Sabina looks at the dishes brought to her. The maid explains that the Duke and Mr. Simon ordered all this to be brought. The girl doesn't understand what kind of torture this is and why they decided to torture her like this. Perhaps a feeling of guilt is gnawing at them. The Sabina, who was the girl a few years ago, would have cried with joy. However, it is already too late. She has changed and wants nothing more. The lady asks Melissa to take away everything brought, to let her eat, and the other servants, and tell the gentleman that the girl liked everything. The maid became emotional and said that everyone should know about the young lady's generosity. Sabina feels a little uncomfortable about such praise, but decides to do one more thing for the maid. The girl approaches the table and rummages around for a while, after which she asks the maid to extend her hand. Melissa doesn't quite understand what they want from her. Sabina gives Melissa a bag with coins. She tells her that this is a little from the sale of some of the things received from Mr. Simon the other day, that the maid should take it, because she has never received anything from the young lady before. Melissa is worried about what will happen if Mr. Simon finds out. The girl assures that everything will be fine. Firstly, no one saw her, and secondly, she did everything herself, so no one will accuse the maid of theft. The maid, not restraining her feelings, says that her mistress is the best in the world. Sabina says goodbye to the maid until the next day and explains that she will return late at night. Melissa wants to know where the young lady is going. Smiling at her maid, the young woman replied that she was going where she had always wanted to go. The prince turns to the servant standing near the carriage. His Highness wants to know who it is intended for. The servant replies that Sir Reynold will be transported in it. While Richard asks the servant where Reynolds will be taken, Sabina sneaks into the carriage, trying not to be seen by anyone. The girl follows the plan that she and the prince devised. He knew that the carriage would be military, and there should be space for weapons in it. This place will not be needed for this trip and will be empty, so the girl can hide there. Which she does. The prince tells Viviana that they will reach the city in about 10 hours. Most likely, upon arrival, they will leave the carriage and the horses. The girl will need to get out of the carriage at this time and go unnoticed. Rent a room and wait. The prince will come for her. When the girl asks how Richard plans to escape, he replies that he gets his way. But he never said what he had in mind. If you believe what is written in the novel, His Highness killed Sabina and he was exiled to the south. It was in exile that Richard met the saint and fell in love with her. And then, everything worked out. Lying in the weapons compartment, the heroine thought that she didn't need to worry about this. Now she had to think about her survival. Sabina runs towards a purple-haired woman. The girl calls her mom. The girl runs into her mother's arms. She missed her very much, which she tells the woman, but she clearly didn't expect to see her daughter. Regina leans towards the girl. She wants to know why Sabina is here, if something happened in House Charlotte. An image of hostile men from House Charlotte appears before Sabina's eyes. The girl assures her mother that everything is fine with them, and there is nothing to worry about. Her eyes fill with tears. She has wanted to see her mother for a long time. Sabina says she came back only because she wants to be close to her mother, and will make sure the woman doesn't get sick anymore. A knock outside wakes Sabina, who had fallen asleep in the arms box, and she realizes that the meeting with her mother was just a dream. Upon waking, the girl notices spots on the floor. She realizes they are bloodstains. A noise is heard outside. Sabina looks through the carriage gap. She needs to find out what is happening. The noise of swords is heard outside, and a battle unfolds. The girl understands that it is an attack. Sabina looks through the crack and doesn't understand how they dared to attack a carriage with the emblems of the imperial family. It is simply unthinkable. The girl hears Sir Reynolds, who loudly asks to be untied and allowed to fight the attackers. Reynolds starts banging on the walls and shouting to let them out if they don't want to die. But no one pays attention to him. Sabina understands that no matter how loud Reynolds shouts, they would rather sacrifice their lives than untie Sir. But if the attackers reach the carriage, the girl's life will be in danger. Deciding to act, Sabina kicks the lid of the box. With this action, she greatly scares Reynolds, as the boxes should be empty. Reynolds falls to the floor. The girl gets out of the box. She does not introduce herself to Reynolds. She silently pulls out a knife, not answering Sir's questions about who she is. Reynolds is afraid. His hands are tied, and he cannot even protect himself from a girl with a knife, in case she kills him. A moment later, the gentleman finds his hands free from the shackles and realizes that he can now act. Reynolds hides the girl in the arms box and, promising to talk to her later, he asks her to stay in the shelter for a while longer. Closing the lid of the box, the gentleman thanks the girl for saving him. Sabina looks at the man surprised. Does he really want to protect her in this situation? The battle is in full swing, but the fighters begin to be distracted when they notice something that should not have happened. If Reynolds sits on the roof of the carriage with a knife that the girl borrowed, observing the battle with a slight smile, Sabina watches what is happening through the carriage crack. She thinks, thank God that she freed Reynolds. He is as good as Richard, if not better, and will resolve everything quickly. If Reynolds does something unexpected, she starts to flee. It is unclear where and why. Still in the box, the girl feels her legs are numb. For several hours, there has been no sound outside. I wonder if she can get out. And who were the attackers? They don't look like bandits, because then they would be looking for valuables. The obvious conclusion was that the attacker's target was Sir Reynolds. Most likely, the Duke and the Empress were in no way involved in the attack on the carriage with the prisoner, which means it was the work of someone else. Many have heard that Sir Reynolds knows a certain secret of House Charlotte. But who would benefit from that information? Maybe the first prince. Sabina, sitting in the shelter, kept thinking. Considering the time of the attack and the number, the last conclusion is quite logical. Sir Reynolds has returned. He opens the lid of the box, and with genuine joy, finds the girl where he left her. In perfect order, all smeared with the blood of his enemies, but unharmed, Reynolds himself finally greets the girl. Sabina wants to know if Sir Reynolds really defeated all those people who were outside. The gentleman tells the girl that the terrain in this situation played an important role and helped him. When the girl asked how the people accompanying him were, Reynolds explained that they were protecting him. Well, the problem seemed to have been resolved. Now Sir Reynolds asks the girl to tell him how she ended up here. And that's when Sabina realizes that they caught her. But she has to answer something. The girl says that her name is Viviana, and she helps in the kitchen of the main mansion. And today, at general time, there was a game of hide-and-seek, and she hid in this carriage. And when she was about to get out, the carriage started moving. Observing Reynolds' reaction to her story, the girl initially decides that the gentleman didn't believe her. Having said that everything is clear to him, Reynolds says that they must leave because they might be pursued. Sabina looked at the man again and wondered if he was too naive. Helping the girl out of the carriage, the gentleman says he saw tied horses on the road. It seems they belong to the assailants. To the girl's question about where he is going, the gentleman replies without a doubt that he is going to the capital. Sabina is worried that they will question him there. Sir Raynal announces that desertion is death for a knight, and that his duty is to accept the punishment. Sabina looks at the gentleman surprised and doesn't understand if this should actually make her happy. Leading the girl to the horses, Reynolds asks her not to worry about him, but to think about herself. The gentleman tells her the next steps. The girl must return to the mansion, and he must go to the capital, which is in the opposite direction. Checking the horses' gait, Reynolds says they will reach the next city together, and then the girl will have to find her way back to the mansion. After placing the girl on the horse, they left. Sabina asks the gentleman to wash off the blood before entering the city. 3 days later, at the Charlotte family mansion, the Duke was studying papers. He was irritated. Everything bothers Benjamin. He orders the maids cleaning the room to leave him in peace. The maids obey. After leaving, the maids discuss why the Duke is in a bad mood. One says it's all because of the disappearance of Sir Reynolds, who was transported to the imperial palace, and all his companions were found dead. It's better not to catch the Duke's eye now. The Duke thought he had put Reynolds on the wanted list, but there is still no news. Sabina must have been upset, because it was she who suggested sending the gentleman to the palace. Remembering Sabina, Benjamin thought it had been a long time since they had seen their niece. Smiling at his thoughts, the Duke decides he needs to check how the girl is doing there. And she is wise too. Maybe she will find out what is the best thing she can do. Melissa, upon arriving at the library, found other maids there. They asked her what Melissa was doing here. The girl replied that she had come at her mistress's request for the next volume of the book. The girls started saying they were jealous that Melissa was working in the annex, because the atmosphere in the main building was very tense now due to Reynolds' disappearance. And they also noticed that Mrs. clothes, which they had brought for washing, were dirtier than before. After saying goodbye to the other maids and leaving the library, Melissa thought she was almost caught. Next time she shouldn't dirty her clothes so much. The maid hopes that the young lady is fine, but needs to wait a little longer. Upon arriving at the room, Melissa finds an unexpected guest. The maid doesn't know what to do. Benjamin turns around upon hearing footsteps. He demands an answer from Melissa about where his niece is. At first, the Duke didn't understand why Sabina started frequently sending dirty laundry to the laundry, because she didn't go outside. But when the girl's maid knelt down, Benjamin understood everything. Upon learning that the girl disappeared 3 days ago, comparing the events, the same day Sir Reynolds was taken away, the Duke is angry. Benjamin is angry. For some reason, only now does he learn about Sabina's disappearance. Melissa completely kneels on the floor. She realizes her guilt and is very afraid of what might happen. The Duke reprimands the maid, telling her that if she needs money, she should simply state the price, but he will return his niece. Melissa assures the Duke that the lady left the mansion of her own free will, and the maid also asks him to leave the young lady alone. Benjamin demands an explanation from the maid. What nonsense are you talking about? What peace are we talking about? The maid hands the Duke a letter and tells him that he will understand everything when he reads it, and that he should read it before looking for the girl. Benjamin takes the letter from the maid and begins to read what is written. Sabina sits down to write a letter to Melissa. This is the first time the girl has written to her. Sabina just wanted to tell the maid, "Thank you for your kindness," because thanks to her, the girl's memories of this place are less painful than they could be. Despite being exiled to the annex, it turned out better here than in the main building. Sabina could study what interested her, and there was time to do what the girl liked. Melissa is probably distressed about Sabina's escape, but the girl does not regret her decision one bit. 3 years have passed since the move. The time spent here was so terrible for Sabina that she wanted to die. No one recognized her. There were moments when the girl thought that if she could become what they wanted her to be, then she could become part of the family represented in the portrait of her friendly family. And Sabina endured only thanks to her fantasies. Previously, the girl's life was completely different. Her mother was a wise and compassionate woman, and Dad always treated guests who came to their house with tea. Everything was going wrong at the Charlotte house. Her mother, who was so proud of Sabina, became the girl's weakness. Sabina writes that she is still scared if someone raises their voice, whether it's outside the window or next to her. It is very painful for the girl that no one in the family notices this. If they had shown at least a little interest, they would have seen everything with their own eyes. But love cannot be begged for or earned. The family never will demand it. A royal family will never be like that. When the girl thought about it, She couldn't understand why she had to live with these people. Sabina felt she had reached her limit and finally decided to leave. She hopes to meet Melissa when she is happy, in the end. At the end of the letter, Sabina only wishes the maid good luck. After reading the letter to the end, the Duke was confused. This was definitely Sabina's handwriting. It was she who advised sending Reynold back to the palace. It turns out the girl was about to leave the estate, caused a commotion, and ran away. A servant ran into the room and reported that the prince had disappeared. No one had seen His Highness since the morning. Benjamin, upon learning of the prince's disappearance, came to the conclusion that the prince and Sabina had planned everything together. The girl looked at the pieces of glass on the floor, which were a cup. She asked if something had happened. Sir Reynold is upset. They consider him a criminal and have put him on the wanted list. They even painted a portrait of him, and it is not clear what to do now. The gentleman was discussing whether he should reveal his identity to the innkeeper and ask him for protection. Sabina starts to speak. She asks the gentleman what he thinks. Who do they think he is now? Those who know about the attack suspect the first prince. Moreover, the gentleman of this city is close to the first prince. Reynolds promises, when he clears his name, to help Viviana with her studies. The girl understands that he is not particularly worried about the search. Reynolds is sure that despite being a suspect, the charges will definitely be dropped, and therefore, there is no need to worry. While preparing, the girl suggests that Sir should return to the Charlotte estate or hurry to the capital, saying that she is going to the temple, and asks Reynold to think about her words. Sabina says she is going to pray for the trip to go smoothly. She asks Sir Reynold not to leave the room without her, because she doesn't want to be caught. Reynolds can only submit, because his portraits are hung all over the city. Sabina went to the temple and was surprised by how the baptism went. The priest almost fell asleep. He immediately called the girl Isabella. Well, this is a very common name, but there is a point. In the original, the Holy Virgin was also named Isabel at baptism, but because her real name was Isabel, Sabina looks at her hands and thinks it is unlikely that she will change because of the name. And the sign did not appear on her hands. One way or another, the girl had to undergo baptism to test her powers. The girl decides to use them on Reynolds, because this is the least she can do to help him. After all, she is to blame for his false accusation, and she also needs to tell Duke Charlotte where the gentleman is so that they take him away. Sabina arrives at the post office and wants to send a letter to Duke Benjamin of Charlotte. The postman, having specified the addressee, says that this letter is unlikely to reach him at the specified address, because the Duke of Charlotte has arrived in the city. The girl cannot believe what she hears. How can the Duke be here? Sabina asks the worker one more question. Maybe he knows why such a busy person as the Duke of Charlotte came to the city. The employee replies that, according to rumors, the Duke is personally at the main gate. Maybe he is looking for someone. Sabina apologizes. She wants to take the letter back, justifying her action by saying she didn't know the addressee was so close. The girl flees the post office. There is confidence that the Duke has come for Sir Reynold. He would never look for Sabina. They don't need her, but they still need to run away before they notice her. Suddenly Sabina stops. She remembers that she has to meet the prince. A few days ago at the Charlotte estate, His Highness instructed Viviana that she should stay at an inn. A man named Ricky will go there and dismiss the girl. Then they will meet. Sabina was confused. She didn't know what to do. She could simply run away, but then she would betray Ricardo and he would chase her to death. But if she stayed, she would be discovered by Mr. Benjamin, and she didn't want her returned to the estate. A woman on the street shakes the girl by the shoulders, noticing the young lady's state, and decided to intervene. The woman asks if everything is all right, because the lady has turned very pale. Sabina assures the passerby that everything is fine and thanks her for her concern. The girl understands that she needs to calm down and recover. For some reason, Sabina says this phrase out loud. Suddenly, a hand is placed on the girl's shoulder, and the fifth prince appears from behind. He repeats the girl's words that Viviana must recover. Overcoming initial fear, Sabina discovers who it is and is even glad to see Ricardo. A minute later, the girl's mood changes, and she starts to find out what the prince is doing here. Because they agreed to meet at the inn, Ricardo pulls Viviana's arms towards him and reminds her that it would be a good idea to start with a greeting. Sabina assures the prince that now is not the time for this, because the carriage was attacked, and Sir Reynold found her while she was hiding, and together they reached the city. By the way, the girl asked how the prince got here, since everyone is checked at the entrance. He replied that due to the large number of people, the search is not very thorough. But Sabina remembered that the prince could use his ability and escaping would be easy for him. Continuing to walk, Sabina finds out if the prince managed to register somewhere. And realizing that he hasn't done it yet, the girl offers to find a hotel not far from where she is staying. Sabina also shares information that the Duke is also here, perhaps looking for Reynolds. The girl and His Highness headed to the inn where she was staying. They walked in silence all the way. Sabina thought there was a chance to get the prince to talk if she took his luggage. The girl approached her companion with the intention of offering him help. Only now did Sabina realize that something was wrong, because the prince had not settled anywhere, and he had nowhere to put his luggage. The girl had a strange premonition as to why the Duke had come to the city, and why Ricardo had nothing with him, because if he went for a walk. The prince looked at his companion and asked what was wrong, because the girl seemed to have seen a ghost. Sabina decided to ask why the prince was still dressed like that, since he was easily identifiable by such expensive attire. Taking the girl's hand, Ricardo tells her that she thinks fast, and that's why he likes her. The heroine understands that she needs to run away, and that it is better to go where there are more people, where Ricardo cannot use his abilities. And she can get lost, for example in the market. Haste, lack of attention, and a small stone took their toll. Sabina began to fall. His Highness caught the girl and told her she should be more careful. Sabina asks to be let go, but Ricardo only mocks how a girl has the courage to say such a thing. He keeps carrying her. The prince approaches the carriage and orders the servant to look for an inn where a boy of about 10 years old was staying, and an adult man. Reynolds will be there, have him brought to His Highness. Getting into the carriage with the girl in his hand, the prince clarifies to the servant that the one they are looking for was named Ricky. Sabina ends up on the floor of the carriage and unpleasantly hits the wall of the vehicle. The driver, hearing a noise inside, asks His Highness if everything is all right. Receiving an affirmative answer, he continues on his way. Replying to the coachman, Ricardo covers the girl's mouth so she doesn't make any sound. Sabina demands an explanation for what just happened. The prince's answer that he saved her from hitting her head does not satisfy the girl. Lifting the girl's face to his, the prince says that she seems very surprised, and that it would be better if she rested before they arrive. Ricardo says there is nothing to worry about. He will make sure that no one bothers the girl. And all this would not have happened if she hadn't resisted. By some unknown force, the prince makes the girl fall asleep. She falls onto his shoulder. Ricardo loudly says that Sabina can sleep peacefully. The girl wakes up screaming that she doesn't want to go back. She is trying to figure out where she is. This place is neither an estate nor an inn. Having said that this is the mansion of Viscount City, Ricardo advises the girl to lie down. Otherwise, it won't look good. Sabina declares that it's fine, and if anything hurts, it's the prince's fault. But he claims that he simply carried the girl in a carriage. And suddenly, she fainted, and the prince became very worried. Sabina doesn't know why. Ricardo brought her here, but she asks to be let go, because she has no reason to be here. His Highness declares that he will stay, because that is what he wants. Sabina decides to run away anywhere. It's better than being in the same room with a crazy prince. After letting the girl run to the door, Ricardo sighs and snaps his fingers. At the same moment, Sabina finds herself back in bed and realizes that the prince used his ability. The girl has no way to escape and nowhere to go. The prince approaches her and tells her that she has always been a troublesome girl. Ricardo's hand falls on Sabina's shoulder, and she starts screaming at him to let her go. And don't touch her. But the prince does nothing. He says the strange thing is that the girl was not surprised to see his strength. He assumed the girl would be scared, but this didn't happen. The heroine asks why the prince showed his strength, but Ricardo is not so foolish as to do that, which is not profitable for him, because that's why Sabina lied to him. Hearing her name, the girl cannot believe at what moment this person could find out who she really is. Perhaps the prince found out about the young lady's disappearance before leaving the mansion. And then, after comparing the information, I realized that the runaway Viviana was the missing young lady. Now, finding out that all this time the girl was posing as someone else and deceived him, the prince will kill her. Sabina asks the prince if he wants to kill her for deceiving him. Ricardo calmly states that if that were the case, the girl would not be here now. This unpleasant conversation was interrupted by the opening of the door and the people who appeared in the room, at whom Sabina was very surprised. Mr. Simon and Mr. Benjamin entered the room. Somehow they were different from always, but the girl didn't understand why the men were here. Simon carefully approaches the girl. He wants to know if Sabina is well and how she is in general. He looks scared. Mr. Simon kneels and hugs the girl and asks her how she ended up here. Sabina is surprised by Mr. Simon's unusually strange behavior. She can't even answer anything. Everything is so unusual. Simon cries, hugging the girl, which makes her feel even more uncomfortable. But the only thought in her head is how they could have found her. A servant appears and reports that if Reynolds is to be taken to the palace as ordered, Benjamin declares that he must be punished for kidnapping the young lady. All this time, the prince remains with a victorious smile. He does not comment on what is happening, but Sabina understood everything without his words. She is still in Mr. Simon's arms, but the way the prince tricked everyone makes the girl feel completely uncomfortable. Benjamin addresses the prince on behalf of House Charlotte and expresses his gratitude to His Highness for saving his niece. Richard says that others can misinterpret what happened, because if Reynolds was his bodyguard, the Duke promises to do everything possible to repay the debt. The prince will not believe only the Duke's words. He believes that for saving the young lady, it would be fair for them to do him a favor in return. The following words surprise the Duke. The prince says that since ancient times, marriage has been the key to a long life together. Mr. Simon already guesses what Richard will say next and doesn't like it. The prince continues to say that this would serve as strong proof of their union. The prince kneels in front of Sabina and asks her to give him the young lady as a wife. The girl is completely confused by this turn of events. She assumed many things, but this is beyond all her imagination. After a while, Mr. Simon and the prince are talking. Simon insists that marriage is not a matter that should be resolved this way. And the prince says that he is not asking for the ceremony to be held right now. He understands that the lady still needs time to recover. And besides, she is still young. An engagement would be the ideal option. Mr. Simon is not very happy with this conversation. He tries to control himself and not show his irritation. On the day of Sabina's disappearance, the prince left the estate, leaving a letter. And while Benjamin was looking for the fugitive Reynolds, he heard rumors that a girl had been seen in the city accompanied by a suspicious man. The Duke also didn't understand. Why was the prince sharing such information? Simon said that although Sabina was indeed in the city, he could not let his guard down. After all, the prince is not the type of person who helps someone for free. So, in the carriage, Simon couldn't even think that the price for the help would be Sabina's engagement. Mr. Simon did not believe that a man who insulted his own mother wanted a mutually beneficial union. So he asked the prince why he wanted this marriage, if it was really all for the sake of the title. Ricardo replied that he didn't know if Mr. Simon would believe him, but the prince fell in love at first sight. That this had nothing to do with external factors, Ricardo simply felt it was fate. And then the prince realized that no one suited him like Sabina. Simon became cautious and reminded the prince that today was their first meeting. Ricardo shrugged and repeated with a smile that it was fate and nothing more. Mr. Simon is very angry about the current situation. He demands that the prince stop joking and choose something else as thanks. His Highness, realizing Mr. Simon's state, declares that it turns out House Charlotte is intimidating its benefactors. Simon asks the prince not to force his gratitude to turn into anger. He agrees to give him a reward for finding the child in the form of money. And for the exiled prince, it will be a really huge sum of money. Ricardo asks if Mr. Simon really believes that Reynolds kidnapped the lady. Why wasn't she kidnapped? Why would this smart girl obediently follow the spy? She used Reynolds to leave the mansion. The prince's speech made Simon stop at the door, and Ricardo continued. He recalled the expression on Sabina's face when she saw the men. The joy of reunion looks different, and the girl was confused and clearly did not want to see them. And all because, for her, they are worse than the kidnapper. Mr. Simon could not bear the tension of such speeches and slapped the insolent prince. Ricardo seemed to expect something like that. He did not react at that moment. He only said that there was no reason to be so angry. The prince said that he knew how negligently Simon treated the lady, and if she ran away once, she surely couldn't run away a second time. Mr. Simon no longer wants to listen to the insolent boy and demands that he shut his mouth. Ricardo does not shut up. He says that Mr. Simon knows the answer, but ignores it, because it is easier to pretend not to understand than to face the truth. The prince declares that Simon still lacks courage. Holding the doorknob, Mr. Simon only says that Sabina will make the decision herself. Upon opening the door, the old man meets his granddaughter. Sabina came to talk to His Highness. Simon insists that the girl has not yet recovered and should not do this, but she assures him that this will not last long. The fifth prince, hearing the conversation, presses Simon that the lady herself said she needed to talk. Simon turns around and reminds him that he said there would be no engagement the boy didn't want. Sabina is left alone with Ricardo. She is quite determined. The prince reminds the girl that she always wanted to get out of here and that, if she accepts his offer, she will be able to live in the palace. Sabina replies that the prince's proposal implies moving from one prison to another. The girl does not agree to marry him. Ricardo says he keeps his word and the girl will be safe. And if she doesn't trust her future husband, then who should she trust? But Sabina reminds the prince that he deceived her. Angry, she asks when exactly Ricardo found out who she really is. The prince replies that he knew from the beginning and that it was Sabina who had been deceiving all this time. Not him. After escaping, Sabina returned to the rooms she had used before. In the main building, she, as before, breathed with difficulty. Melissa came. She is very happy for the young lady's return and that she is fine. Sabina asks if the maid told anyone about the disappearance, because they could have been fired. Melissa replied that because of the sad letter the girl left, she could not admit that the girl was missing. But if the young lady wants to run away again, then she should tell her. Sabina says she won't leave again. She promises to earn as much money as necessary to pay Melissa a salary. And even if she wants to leave, she will definitely take the maid with her. They knock on the door, and Melissa goes to open it, thinking it's the tea she asked the lady to prepare. But when she opens the door, the maid discovers that a tea came. Behind the door is the fifth prince, who has come to see Sabina. The girl asks the maid to invite the prince in, and they go out for a while to talk privately. Entering the room, Ricardo says that somehow it is not particularly hospitable, that the girl is not too cruel to the prince, that he did not hear a response to his proposal, and that they are like those same doves that almost flew out of the cage. Sabina replies that if she had known that His Highness was that person, she would not have promised to run away together. Having heard from the girl about such a person, the prince reminded Sabina that she herself had said that nothing could be done. Remember what the girl said, that people lose their legs due to an accident. They are born with one eye, but it is not their fault. Upon hearing such a reminder, Sabina, stuttering slightly, says that then she released him too thoughtlessly. Ricardo accuses the girl of refusing to talk. She tries to explain to him that it was not necessary to go that far, because Sir Reynold is not to blame for anything. With a smile, the prince says that, unfortunately, Sir Reynold lost the trust of the imperial family and of House Charlotte, so he received a deserved punishment. Ricardo continues to say about Reynold that everything is correct. The gentleman did not report to the garrison and hid like a mouse. Sabina tries to protect Sir Reynold, who said nothing because he was attacked. The girl is pierced by a terrible conjecture. What if the first prince was not guilty? What if Ricardo planned all this? After thinking for a while, the girl addresses the fifth Prince Ricardo. She will accept his proposal if in return the prince does not touch Sir Reynold, neither now nor in the future. Sabina also asks to return to the knight everything he should have had initially. These are the conditions set by the girl. After thinking for a while, Ricardo decides that it is a good idea. If the power of the emperor's family and Charlotte combine, then this incident can be covered up as an ordinary incident. Sabina realized that this game could not be won. Ricardo thought about the moves for each of the girl's choices. The girl decides that she will simply think positively, if only because she has paid her debt to Reynold. And this is the most she can do. After pausing for a moment at the door, the prince asks Sabina how she would explain why Reynold came to him as an escort. The empress simply needed a man to kill the prince at the right moment. Sabina had to decide for herself what to do with this information and whether to believe Ricardo's words. The girl went to Duke Benjamin and said she would marry the prince. Sitting down, Sabina began to say that she knew that the relationship between the 7 Charlottes and the empress had been affected because of this incident. The marriage could be a sign of reconciliation. Benjamin sighed and tells his niece that this is not something she should worry about. The girl admits that everything happened because of her fault, because Sir Reynold did nothing wrong. And the letter she sent was her doing, and no one kidnapped her. She left the mansion herself. After listening to the girl, the Duke asked only one question. Why did she do it? Sabina answered frankly that she did it because she didn't want to be at the estate. Since the conversation had taken this turn, the Duke told the girl the truth he knew, because he had seen the letter Sabina left for the maid. Benjamin tells his niece that she doesn't have to get married to get out of this place. In all the time the girl has been here, she hasn't done that much for her. The uncle says that every time he saw Sabina, he couldn't help but remember his brother. And being unable to stand it, he didn't confront Mr. Simon. Although he should have, he was a coward. After making the revelations, Benjamin heard a question from the young woman that he did not expect. She asked if the Duke now wanted to atone for his guilt. Sabina continued, if her uncle really regrets it, he shouldn't be kind to her because she still wants to hate him. That said, the girl leaves the new room and finally tells the Duke that it is already too late, that she went too far. Left alone, Benjamin wondered what would happen if it were Liam, the man he trusted and admired. Benjamin trusted him, even when Liam left the mansion for the woman he loved, because he was sure that everything would be fine with his brother. The noble eldest son of the 7 Charlottes died, crushed by a cart full of tea leaves. That day, someone lost a husband, someone lost a father, also lost a son, and his only brother. Benjamin thought that if he hadn't let his brother go back then, none of this would have happened. But now it's too late to regret. It's better to think about how to atone for his guilt. Sitting with a cup of tea, Sabina thought that this was some kind of madness. Although the prince said that they were engaged now, it had not been officially announced. The news spread too quickly. People the girl doesn't know sent her gifts regarding her engagement. The estate servants became overly friendly towards the young lady. The prince will be able to count on the support of House Charlotte in the fight for the throne. This is a win-win situation for everyone except her. These thoughts swirled in the girl's head. A sugar cube thrown into a cup brought her back to reality. The prince sitting opposite said that sweets make you feel better. But Sabina seemed to be in no mood. The girl sarcastically asked for whom it might be. Ricardo knows for sure from him. But why does the girl allow herself to treat her fiancé like this? Sabina raised her hands. Maybe the prince didn't know, but common people build relationships differently. They can know everything about each other's families, but there is no room for interest in a partner. Ricardo made a bitter face. Sabina realized that something displeased him again. Having said that she couldn't even drink tea, the girl got up from the table. If the prince had nothing else to say, maybe she would leave. Ricardo stops the girl by taking her hand. Sabina is not particularly fond of this action by the prince. His Highness asks the girl to entertain him again with something similar. Sabina starts to get angry. She is not here to please the prince. Ricardo says that she used to do this, and even talk about things he didn't ask about. Although now she cannot behave like that. The prince hit her wanting to have her, but not to finally use her. Sabina pulls her hand out of the prince's hand. She is indignant. Maybe His Highness didn't know, but common people build relationships differently. To which Ricardo replies that everyone lives by taking advantage of each other. Sabina did the same to the prince himself, according to him. The girl bursts out and loudly says that, unlike the prince, she was sincere. It is not clear what the prince had in mind. Ricardo replies that he was also sincere, because Sabina was special to him. The girl, realizing that it was useless to talk to him, decided to leave the prince's company, saying that she needed to choose a dress for the banquet. After leaving the prince, Sabina thought it was her fault for getting involved in all this. Although initially she knew that His Highness was a psychopath. Fabian ran into the girl. He asked if she was tired of constantly meeting with the prince. Sabina admits that her brother was right, that one should not get involved with someone like a prince. Noticing an abrasion on the Duke's son's cheek, the sister wonders if this is the prince's doing. Fabian confirms Sabina's assumption. He complains that the prince uses dirty tricks during training and asks his sister to cancel the engagement now. Sabina asks if Fabian knows that a fool cannot be healed by magic or by God's gift. And at the same time, she places her hand on his cheek. Sabina focuses her strength, and the abrasion on her brother's cheek disappears instantly. Not understanding his sister's motives for such touches, Fabian runs away from her, without even realizing that the girl healed him. Sabina convinced herself that through her baptism, she could use her powers on others. The girl becomes sad that having the gift of healing, she cannot go to her mother, who needs it so much. Sabina thought that with Ricardo's ability, she could easily return undetected if she just bowed her head. And asked. The maid Greta informs that the dressmaker will arrive soon. Sabina thanks her for the information. Greta says she accidentally saw the young lady with Mr. Fabian, if he really took out his anger on the girl. Sabina does not believe in the accident the maid is talking about. The girl has to explain that they just greeted each other, nothing serious. Greta will tell Mr. Benjamin about it, because he himself chose her for Sabina. In the conversation, the Duke said that Sabina already has a good and devoted maid. And therefore, instead of firing Melissa, the Duke asks permission to assign another maid to the girl, who will become her eyes. Greta led Sabina to the corridor, but the girl starts to wonder why. The maid doesn't have time to answer. The Duke's personal dressmaker, Briar, arrives, and the maid tells him that the gentleman asks him to create a dress for the young lady. The dressmaker studies the girl with his gaze, remembering what he heard about the young lady from House Charlotte, that she is the illegitimate daughter of the eldest son who fell in love with a maid. Briar, realizing who is in front of him, strikes a pose and completely refuses to work with the girl.